In a quiet little village, a young boy stood proudly with a wooden stick in his hand and a small cape fluttering behind him. With complete seriousness, he announced that he was a powerful wizard. Not far away, a girl eagerly joined the game. She puffed out her chest and declared that she was a fearsome monster who devoured wizards. The boy didn't hesitate. Preparing to cast his spell, he shut his eyes and took a deep breath as if gathering magical energy. Fully committed to the moment, he swung the stick dramatically and accidentally struck the girl on the head. The girl immediately complained, pointing out with childlike logic that he had actually hit her for real. The boy defended himself just as seriously. According to him, monsters were supposed to lose to wizards, so it made perfect sense. Their playful argument continued until the girl demanded that she should be allowed to become a wizard as well. The boy stubbornly refused, insisting that only he could have that role. Watching the scene from a short distance away was an elderly man with a warm, amused smile. The children called him Grandpa Rabbis. He slowly approached with two other villagers, commenting that the kids were unusually energetic so early in the morning. Young Tron, still excited from the game, quickly asked Rabbis what someone had to do in order to become a wizard. Before the old man could answer, the girl interrupted, insisting that becoming a wizard wasn't something you could simply wish for. Rabbis eventually explained. Wizards, he said, stood at the very peak of human society, powerful figures among nobles and knights who inherited their abilities through ancient bloodlines. Then, with blunt honesty, he delivered a harsh truth. Because of that, neither of the children would ever become one. One of the nearby villagers frowned at his words, scolding him for speaking so harshly to the kids. But Rabbi's expression had already turned serious. He confirmed that troubling news had reached the village. A monster had appeared. The mood shifted immediately. In a grave tone, Rabbis explained that a man named Rob had encountered it the night before, a creature the size of a house, shaped like a giant leopard and cloaked in darkness. The young girl looked frightened, but a woman quickly reassured her. The village chief, she explained, had already traveled to the city to request help from a wizard. Once a wizard arrived, the monster would surely be defeated. That reassurance eased the tension slightly. The woman then warned her daughter firmly to stay far away from the forest for the time being. Rabbis rested his weight on his staff and reminded everyone to remain cautious. Without a wizard, defeating a monster would be nearly impossible. When someone asked whether the whole village had been informed, Rabbis confirmed that they had. Another villager then wondered about the shepherd who lived alone on Israel Hill, visible in the distance beyond the village. The scene shifted to that hill. Sheep wandered peacefully across wide green fields beneath the open sky. In the middle of the flock, a young man lay stretched out on the grass, lazily enjoying the afternoon. It was Tron, now grown. He slowly opened his eyes, a thin blade of grass resting between his lips. Around him, the quiet sounds of grazing sheep filled the air. Stretching his arms, he muttered about how boring his life had become. To Tron, each day felt exactly the same. The same view, the same sheep wandering without worry, the same routine repeating endlessly on his lonely farm. Nothing ever changed. Sometimes he even wondered if he might forget how to speak from having so little company. His thoughts were interrupted by a voice calling him a lazy brat. Rabbis had climbed the hill and now stood nearby, scolding him for lying around when the sun had not even set yet. Without bothering to look at him, Tron simply told the old man to move aside because he was blocking the sunlight. Offended, Rabbis muttered about the young man's terrible manners. Then he asked if Tron was still holding a grudge over something that had happened years ago. Tron repeated the words as though he didn't remember. With clear irritation, Rabbis reminded him of the time shortly after Tron's mother died, when he had suggested that the sheep should be treated as shared property. Tron stood up slowly. His expression turned cold as he replied that he had no intention of sharing the inheritance his mother left him. They weren't close, he said, so if Rabbis had something important to say, he should say it quickly and leave. The old man flared up angrily, calling him a rude brat. But the sharp, defiant look in Tron's eyes stopped him from continuing. Awkwardly clearing his throat, Rabbis changed the subject and told him about the monster. This finally caught Tron's attention. As he gently stroked one of his sheep, Rabbis explained that the creature was said to resemble a leopard as large as a house and that he had already warned the villagers about it. Tron calmly replied that the situation sounded serious. Rabbis frowned at his lack of concern. Since Tron lived closest to the forest, he might become the monster's first target. He urged him to stay alert and reminded him that the village chief had gone to bring a wizard. Tron sat down again with his back turned. Rabbis claimed he had come because he was worried about him, but Tron bluntly pointed out that the old man was probably more concerned about the sheep instead. Rabbis didn't deny it. He simply smiled awkwardly. Tron waved him off, telling him to leave if he had finished talking. As a final insult, he added that Rabbi's breath smelled so bad it could rot someone's nose. Grumbling angrily, Rabbi stomped away while muttering curses under his breath. Tron watched him go with a faint grin before turning back to his flock. Still, the word monster lingered in his thoughts. Just as humans had wizards, beasts had monsters, creatures with mysterious powers. One of the sheep nudged him curiously as he considered the idea. It seemed strange that a wizard would be sent all the way to such a remote village just to deal with a single creature. Even so, the possibility sparked his curiosity. Perhaps he would finally see a wizard in person. As he guided his flock along the hill, he wondered what kind of person would arrive. For a village this small, the wizard probably wouldn't be very impressive. Even so, Tron couldn't help feeling curious about how powerful one might actually be. Then suddenly his expression changed. A faint scent drifted through the air, sharp and metallic. He recognized it instantly. Blood. And it was coming from the nearby forest. The sun was beginning to sink, casting an eerie orange light through the trees. Without hesitation, Tron stepped into the woods, following the smell as it grew stronger with every step. Eventually he stopped. He had found the source. His gaze fell on the scene before him, though his expression remained strangely calm despite the horror. Rabbi's body lay on the ground, horribly mutilated and surrounded by a dark pool of blood. Tron stared at the sight for a moment before quietly muttering that the old man had been warned to be careful, yet he had become the first victim. The scent he followed had come from him. Kneeling beside the corpse, Tron carefully examined the wounds. Tron studied the wounds on Rabbi's body with a calm, analytical gaze. The damage was far too violent to have been caused by any ordinary animal. No wolf or bear could have torn a body apart like this. Only one explanation remained. The monster. A sudden tremor behind him broke the silence. Instantly alert, Tron turned just as a massive claw crashed into the ground nearby, sending dirt and stones flying. At the center of the claw glowed a sinister light. From the darkness between the trees, a towering creature emerged. Its body looked like a fusion of jagged rock and swirling shadow, radiating a menacing aura. The beast growled deeply, its presence pressing heavily against the air around it. Tron slowly faced the monster. Despite the overwhelming size and power of the creature, his expression showed no fear. He simply stood there, watching it carefully, as if studying an unusual specimen rather than confronting a deadly threat. A memory surfaced in his mind. When he was younger, Tron had once asked his father how powerful monsters truly were. Could ordinary adults defeat them? His father had answered honestly. Monsters were terrifyingly strong. If someone like him ever faced one, he probably wouldn't even be able to gather his bones afterward. Hearing that had frightened the boy. If even his father couldn't win, then what would happen to their village? But his father had reassured him calmly while serving breakfast. The village chief would bring a wizard. And when that wizard arrived, the monster would be dealt with. Young Tron had listened with shining eyes. He had asked whether the wizard could really defeat the monster. His father had smiled with quiet confidence. Wizards, he said, were extraordinary beings born with magic. With just a single word, they could destroy a monster. The memory faded as the present returned. The monster roared before him, its massive body radiating destructive energy. Tron recalled his father's words about the power of wizards. A faint smile appeared on his lips. Perhaps it was time to test that idea. In a cold, commanding voice, he spoke a single word. Die. For a brief moment, the monster hesitated, as if confused. But nothing happened. The creature remained completely unharmed, its growl deepening as its dark aura intensified. Tron's command had failed. He let out a quiet sigh, casually brushing dust from his clothes as though he weren't standing in front of a lethal monster. The calmness in his behavior was unsettling. The beast, now enraged, lunged forward, its claws ready to tear him apart. Tron spoke again, his tone unchanged. Stop. The monster ignored the order completely and continued charging. A faint smile returned to Tron's face. He had already suspected that simply commanding it to die wouldn't work. Even stopping it proved impossible. It seemed he was calmly testing the limits of whatever strange power he possessed. The creature raised its enormous claws, energy gathering around its body as it prepared to crush him in a single blow. At the last instant, Tron sprang backward with surprising agility, narrowly avoiding the devastating strike. His expression finally grew serious. In that case, he murmured quietly, a different method is needed. Reaching into his pocket, he pulled out something unexpectedly ordinary, a small stone. With steady determination, he muttered that sometimes a shepherd simply had to rely on a shepherd's tools. From his clothing, he produced a simple sling and placed the stone inside it. The monster charged again without hesitation, but Tron was already prepared. Gripping the sling tightly, he issued his first true command. Harden. A sharp cracking sound echoed as the stone instantly compressed, becoming unnaturally dense. The object vibrated faintly with a strange power. Tron's eyes began to glow with a golden light as he gave the next order. Accelerate. He spun the sling rapidly, building incredible speed. The air around him distorted from the force as the weapon gained momentum. Planting his foot firmly on the ground, he focused all his strength into the throw. At the exact moment he released the sling, he spoke the final command. Pierce. The stone shot forward like a streak of light, leaving a trail of brilliant energy behind it. When it struck the monster, the impact unleashed a violent explosion of blue power that tore straight through the creature's rocky body. The projectile punched a perfectly round hole through its chest, blasting apart fragments of stone and spraying dark fluid through the air before continuing into the distance and detonating far beyond the trees. The attack had worked perfectly. For a moment, the monster remained standing, frozen in place as if stunned by what had just happened. Tron watched it with a confident smile. "This is only the beginning," he said quietly. Without hesitation, he loaded another stone into the sling, this one larger than the first. The creature, already gravely injured, struggled to remain upright. Tron released the second shot. The stone struck the monster's head with devastating force. The impact was so powerful that its skull shattered instantly, exploding into fragments. The battle ended in an instant. The massive body collapsed heavily to the ground, lifeless. Tron watched the fallen creature without celebration. His expression remained calm and thoughtful, as though he were simply analyzing the results of an experiment rather than celebrating a victory. Tron stared at the fallen monster in silence. The massive corpse lay broken across the ground, surrounded by blood and dark fluid seeping into the soil. He quietly noted to himself that this was the first time he had ever used his power against a real monster. Examining the remains, he wondered what should be done with the body. Leaving it here might cause trouble for the villagers later. Perhaps dragging it to a nearby ravine and throwing it down would be easier. With a small sigh of irritation, he wiped the blood from his face. Instead of feeling triumphant after defeating such a creature, he only felt annoyed. In his mind, he grumbled that the villagers always seemed to leave him with extra work. The quiet shepherd living on the hill had a secret no one in the village knew. Tron was a mage. His thoughts drifted back 8 years to the moment he first realized something about himself was different. At the time, he had been only 10 years old. Inside his small home, young Tron had been happily experimenting with the strange ability he had discovered. Bluish energy floated around him as several objects hovered in the air. Excited by what he could do, he called out to his mother, eager to show her the logs he had lifted effortlessly into the air. He expected admiration, maybe even praise. But the figure standing in the doorway reacted very differently. His mother stood completely still, shock and fear spreading across her face. Tron didn't understand her reaction. Smiling proudly, he ran toward her and explained that he could do even more than that. He could create fire. He could move the wind. Even years later, that moment remained perfectly clear in his memory. Suddenly, his mother shouted at him to stop. Panic filled her voice. It was the first, and last, time she had ever spoken to him that way. Confused, the boy could only stare as she quickly grabbed one of the floating objects and called his name again. Her voice softened slightly, but the seriousness in her expression remained. She told him to sit down. Then she asked him a question. Did he want to stay with her for a long time? Without hesitation, Tron nodded. After that, she asked him to make a promise. From that day onward, he must never use that power again, especially not in front of other people. Pain and worry were clearly written across her face. Not understanding her fear, Tron asked why. His mother reminded him of an old story about a noble and a knight, one he had heard before. She explained that although everyone who possessed such abilities was called a mage, there were important differences between them. Nobles were believed to be descendants of divine beings who had once descended to protect humanity. Knights, however, were the result of those divine bloodlines mixing with ordinary human blood. Tron confirmed that he remembered the story, but she continued, clarifying why it mattered. Because of that origin, nobles and knights were not treated the same, even among mages. Then she revealed the truth about him. The power he possessed had come from his father, who had been a knight from beyond their village. Her voice grew heavy as she warned him about the world outside. Some nobles were cruel, she explained, and they treated knights as nothing more than servants, or worse, slaves. That was why he had to follow one rule above all others. No one could ever discover that he was a mage. Looking at him with deep concern, she asked him to promise again. 8 years had passed since that day. Back in the present, Tron stood beside the window of his small home. For all that time, he had kept the promise he made to his mother. As he pulled the curtain aside and looked outside, his resolve remained firm. The promise would never be broken. He had no intention of revealing his magic to anyone, nor did he plan to leave the quiet mountain where he lived. A peaceful, hidden life was all he wanted. Suddenly, that calm shattered. Someone began pounding loudly on his door, shouting his name and demanding that he come outside immediately. Annoyed by the noise, Tron walked over and opened the door. A group of villagers stood waiting outside. At the front was a large, rough-looking man staring at him with open hostility. Tron yawned right in front of him before casually asking what the problem was. When he heard their accusations, he summarized them bluntly, which only angered them further. "So you're saying I killed rabbis?" The leader grabbed him by the collar, calling him shameless. According to him, Tron had attacked the old man and left him helpless in the forest to be eaten by monsters. Tron remained completely silent at first, showing no reaction to the serious accusation. When he finally spoke, it wasn't to defend himself. In a cold, detached tone, he said he understood why they were blaming him. The villagers were momentarily stunned. Then Tron exposed the truth they didn't want to admit. The oldest man in the village had died alone because the younger men had been too afraid to confront the monster. Blaming him was simply the easiest way to avoid their own guilt. A mocking smile appeared on his face as he said it was a convenient excuse for their cowardice. Furious at having their weakness exposed, the leader shouted his name and threw a punch. Tron reacted instantly. With effortless movement, he leaned back just enough for the blow to miss him completely. As he moved, a thought crossed his mind about his magic. It was simple, convenient, almost effortless. Using the attacker's own momentum against him, Tron twisted his body and flipped the man over his shoulder, slamming him hard onto the ground. The man lay there groaning, blood trickling from his mouth. Tron knew something about his ability that made it especially dangerous. If he truly desired something strongly enough, he could make it happen, so long as he was willing to spend a small amount of mana. As the remaining villagers rushed to help their fallen leader, Tron quietly murmured a command so soft it was almost impossible to hear. "Fall." In the very next instant, one of the men stumbled forward and crashed face-first into the dirt. Tron didn't rely on dramatic displays of magic. He had no need to summon flames or unleash storms. A faint push of wind was enough to throw someone off balance. With barely noticeable movements, he guided another man into losing his footing. When one villager tried to raise his weapon, Tron gave the stick a subtle touch with his magic. The weapon suddenly snapped backward, striking its owner squarely in the face and leaving him disoriented. Every motion was calculated with precision. Tron controlled the situation carefully, using only enough force to stop them without causing fatal harm. One after another, the villagers fell before him. He moved through them quietly, almost like a shadow slipping between clumsy opponents. Each strike was deliberate and controlled, neutralizing them with minimal effort. Their weapons might as well have been useless. Within moments, the final villager collapsed onto the ground. This was the method Tron had used for 8 years to keep his secret hidden. Standing among the unconscious men, he calmly brushed the dust from his hands. Once again, no one had realized that a mage had just defeated them. Looking down at the groaning villagers, he spoke with clear contempt. They could have used this same energy to prepare Rabbi's funeral instead of coming here to accuse him. His attention shifted when he noticed several women approaching cautiously from a distance. With mild irritation, he asked if they had come to fight as well. The women quickly denied it, nervously explaining that they had only come to check on him. Tron's expression made it obvious he didn't believe a word of it. Tired of the entire situation, he ordered them to carry the unconscious fools away and turn back toward his house. As he stepped inside, he already anticipated the consequences. The villagers would probably use this incident as an excuse to cheat him the next time he went down to trade goods. But the thought didn't bother him much. A confident smile crossed his face as he decided that if they tried anything like that, he would simply beat them again until they offered a fair deal. Just as he believed the problem was finally over, loud knocking echoed against his door once more. Tron turned toward it in disbelief. Surely those idiots weren't foolish enough to return so quickly. However, these knocks sounded different, firm, steady, and controlled. Nothing like the chaotic pounding from earlier. He swung the door open while shouting impatiently, ready to confront whoever was outside. But the words stopped in his throat. The man standing at the doorway was not a villager. Instead, an imposing stranger waited there. His face carried several old scars, and his clothing suggested the life of a traveler. Gray hair framed his rugged features, and a short beard covered his jaw. The man politely apologized, explaining that he had only come to ask a small favor and seemed to have arrived at a bad moment. For a brief moment, Tron was completely speechless. The unexpected visitor caught him off guard. Perhaps the man was simply a traveler passing through. After collecting himself, Tron apologized as well, explaining that he had just dealt with some unwelcome guests. Privately, he reflected that his mother had always taught him to be polite. But since he rarely had reason to treat the villagers kindly, the situation felt strange to him. Still, the sight of a stranger carrying a sword in such a quiet and remote place immediately made him cautious. He began suggesting that if the man was searching for an inn, he should head toward the village instead. But before he could finish speaking, the traveler's stomach growled loudly with hunger. Tron sighed in quiet resignation. Despite his suspicions, he stepped aside and invited the man inside. Soon the two of them were seated at a table, where Tron placed a simple yet generous meal before his guest. He mentioned that he didn't have much to offer. The traveler, however, began eating enthusiastically, praising the food as if it were a feast. After a while, the man remarked with curiosity that Tron seemed unfamiliar with people from outside the village. Tron answered honestly. He had been born on this hill and had spent his entire life there as a shepherd. Visitors rarely came to such a small and isolated place. The traveler listened closely while drinking, his eyes sharpening as he observed Tron carefully. Tron drank as well, maintaining a calm expression despite the quiet tension building between them. After a moment, the traveler commented that he found Tron to be a rather interesting person. Tron simply raised an eyebrow and asked innocently what exactly he meant by that. The traveler observed Tron quietly for a moment before pointing something out. For a shepherd living alone on a remote hill, his manners seemed unusually polished. Someone must have educated him well. Tron answered calmly that whatever manners he had came from his mother. She had taught him everything he knew before passing away years earlier due to illness. The traveler lowered his head slightly in respect. A woman capable of raising such a son, he said, surely deserved to rest peacefully. Tron simply replied that he continued living the way she had taught him. Not wanting to linger on the subject, he shifted the conversation and asked what had brought the stranger to such an isolated place. With an easy smile, the man explained his purpose. He had been asked to deal with a monster said to be roaming somewhere in the surrounding area. Hearing this, Tron revealed something deliberately ambiguous. He mentioned that he was a mage. From what the villagers had said earlier, he assumed the man must be the wizard the village chief had gone to fetch. The traveler confirmed the assumption without hesitation. Now it was his turn to ask questions. Wearing a sly expression, he asked if he could ask one of his own. Tron agreed. The man leaned back slightly and explained that he could sense the presence of a monster nearby. Yet strangely, he couldn't find it anywhere. A brief flicker of alertness appeared in Tron's eyes. The traveler continued speaking. What puzzled him even more was Tron's reaction. Even knowing there was a monster nearby, he showed no intention of running away. Considering that the shepherd lived closest to the forest, he should logically be the most likely target. Yet Tron remained completely calm. With a faint, mocking smile, the traveler remarked that such courage seemed unusual for someone who claimed to be nothing more than a simple shepherd who had never left his village. The atmosphere in the room quietly grew heavier. The man's gaze sharpened as he looked directly at Tron and asked him to reveal who he truly was. Those words caused old memories to rise in Tron's mind. Years ago, when he was still a child, he had once asked his mother why he couldn't reveal his magic to anyone. Her answer had been simple yet painful. It was because of the nobles. When he had asked what she meant, she explained the harsh structure of the world. Nobles stood at the top, while knights existed beneath them. If nobles were like shepherds, knights were like the dogs they raised, loyal and useful, but ultimately disposable. Even if treated kindly, they could be sold, sacrificed, or abandoned whenever necessary. Tears had filled her eyes as she spoke. She told him she never wanted that kind of life for him. Then she asked him a question. Did he want to keep living with her? Without hesitation, the young boy had answered yes. After that, she gave him a final instruction he was never meant to forget. No one must ever discover that he was a mage, especially other mages. If they found out, they would take him away, turning him into nothing more than a guard dog that could be discarded whenever it was no longer needed. The memory faded. Back in the present, Tron's eyes had grown cold. The reason he chose to live in isolation had always been clear to him. Across the table, the traveler slowly shifted his hand to the sword at his side and drew it slightly from its sheath. The soft scrape of metal filled the quiet room. He spoke calmly, offering what sounded almost like advice. If someone wished to keep their identity as a mage hidden, then certain situations might require extreme actions. Sometimes, protecting a secret meant doing things others would consider unforgivable. Even killing someone inside a small cabin, he said, could become necessary. The seasoned warrior introduced himself as Cahorn. With a serious tone, he explained that sometimes violence was the only way to ensure a secret remained safe. Hearing those words, the silver-haired youth looked away briefly, his expression darkening as if the idea had struck close to home. Then Tron slowly turned his gaze back toward the man and asked him why he would say something like that. For a moment, Cahorn covered his face with one hand, as though regretting how harsh his words had sounded. Then, unexpectedly, he began laughing. He explained that with such a serious reaction, Tron was ruining the joke. Tron blinked in confusion. He couldn't believe the man was claiming that something so grim had been meant as humor. After a brief pause, Tron apologized awkwardly, admitting that he probably lacked any real sense of humor. Cahorn quickly apologized for the unsettling remark. He admitted that he hadn't meant to frighten Tron and tried to ease the tension by joking that it might have been his first attempt at a wizard's joke. Realizing that neither of them had properly introduced themselves yet, Cahorn extended his hand with a friendly smile. Tron accepted the gesture, shaking his hand. Only then did he give his name, calmly introducing himself as Tron, a shepherd who lived on the hill. While their hands were still clasped, he casually added that he had recently turned 18. Later, as they continued sharing the meal, Cahorn revealed something unexpected about himself. He mentioned that he was 75 years old. Tron stared at him in disbelief. The man sitting across from him looked nowhere near that age. Cahorn simply explained that mages aged differently from ordinary people. Their bodies weakened much more slowly, allowing them to live far longer lives. Curiosity then crossed his face, and he asked Tron how he had ended up living such an isolated life on the hill. Maintaining his role as an innocent 18-year-old shepherd, Tron answered with a carefully constructed story. He claimed that he had once spent 60 years serving the House of Arabian and had only recently chosen to travel freely. Cahorn smiled at the tale, remarking that such a wish sounded rather romantic. Tron responded with a quiet, mysterious smile, continuing to play along with the story he had created. The conversation flowed easily after that. Both men found themselves enjoying the simple act of talking with someone. It had been a long time since either of them had shared such relaxed company. Time slipped by unnoticed. Eventually, through the window, the fading sunlight revealed that evening had arrived. Tron glanced outside in mild surprise, realizing how quickly the hours had passed. Cahorn rose from his seat, saying that he should be on his way. Before leaving, he placed several silver coins from the Arabian mint on the table as payment for the meal. He explained that the coins were of excellent quality and more than enough to cover the food. Tron accepted them and wished him good luck with the hunt for the monster. However, Cahorn shook his head with a playful smile. There was no need for such a farewell, he said, as though they would never see each other again. Perhaps he might return soon and enjoy another meal or two before leaving the region. The next morning, sunlight spread across the hills, marking the end of their brief meeting and the beginning of a new day. Out in the open fields, Tron guided his flock as they grazed peacefully across the grass. With a small smile, he gave a simple command for them to gather. At the sound of his voice, the sheep raised their heads and obediently moved closer, clustering around him. While tending to them, his thoughts drifted back to the previous evening. It had been the first time he had ever met another mage face to face. In truth, he couldn't even remember the last time he had spoken so comfortably with another person. As he gently stroked the wool of one of the sheep, he recalled the calm warmth in Cahorn's voice. He also remembered the few occasions when the man had visited before, always arriving with a friendly smile and sometimes bringing a small gift. Among all the adults Tron had known throughout his life, Cahorn seemed like a genuinely good person. For a long time, Tron had believed that knights were nothing more than obedient hounds used by arrogant nobles. Yet Cahorn didn't fit that image at all. Suddenly, his thoughts faltered. A bead of sweat slid down his forehead as another question crossed his mind. How had Cahorn's hunt gone? At that same moment, the gray-haired mage was walking along a path through the forest. In his mind, the mission should already have been finished. There shouldn't have been any magical beast left alive in this area. But something felt off. Cahorn slowed his steps and carefully scanned the surroundings. The ground clearly showed signs that a fierce battle had taken place. And yet, he couldn't sense even the faintest trace of a magical beast's aura anywhere nearby. Cahorn slowly approached a nearby tree whose trunk had been crushed by an enormous impact. The damage was far too severe to be natural. Studying the marks, he wondered if the magical beast he had been sent to hunt had already been killed. If that were true, the question remained, who had done it? For a moment, he considered the possibility that his client had assigned the task to another mage without informing him. The thought made him release a quiet breath. In the end, it didn't matter much. If the creature had been eliminated and the area was safe again, that was what truly counted. But just as he reached that conclusion, a sharp warning surged through his instincts. Something was terribly wrong. Cahorn spun around instantly, reacting to the sudden presence he had sensed behind him. From the dense undergrowth, a monstrous claw emerged, massive and grotesque. At its center glowed a single eerie eye. Then the creature stepped fully into view. Its body was a horrifying mass of stitched-together remains, rotting pieces of magical beasts crudely fused into a single abomination. Jagged fangs crowded its twisted jaws, and its entire form looked unnatural, as though it had been forcibly assembled from the dead. Cahorn froze for a brief moment as he recognized what stood before him. A corpse puppet. This abomination had been created from the remains of a magical beast. Shock spread across his face. Who could possibly create something so vile? The creature gave him no time to think. With a violent roar, it swung its enormous claw toward him. Cahorn barely managed to react in time. He dodged to the side as the claw slammed into the ground, shattering the earth where he had stood moments earlier. Even while evading the attack, his mind raced through the situation. When the mana inside a slain magical beast wasn't properly dispersed, the body could transform into a corpse puppet. Any mage who hunted such creatures knew that rule well. No experienced hunter would ignore something so basic. Without hesitation, Cahorn launched himself into the air, preparing to counterattack. He was now certain that another mage had killed the original beast. But why would they allow the corpse to transform into something like this? The thought of a careless novice crossed his mind, but he quickly dismissed it. No inexperienced knight could defeat a magical beast of this level in the first place. That left only one explanation. Whoever had done this must have had another purpose for creating such a monster. But there was no time to dwell on theories. Whatever the reason behind it, the creature in front of him had to be destroyed immediately. Channeling his power, Cahorn infused his sword with crackling magical energy. The blade shone brightly as he unleashed a powerful burst of magic directly at the abomination. The attack struck its target perfectly. Yet to his astonishment, the creature didn't even flinch. His magic had no effect at all. In that moment, the truth became painfully clear. The monster's mana far exceeded his own. Before he could react further, the creature's body dissolved into a dark mist, vanishing from sight entirely. Cahorn gritted his teeth. The monster wasn't just powerful, it could also use magic. "Show yourself," he shouted, scanning the shadows around him. The answer came instantly. From a pool of darkness behind him, the creature reappeared and attacked with terrifying speed. The claw struck him directly, sending him flying through the air. Pain exploded through his body as blood filled his mouth. In that moment, he understood the grim reality. This opponent was far beyond the level a mere knight could handle. At the very least, it would take a lower-ranked noble to fight a creature like this. He slammed violently into the ground, his body battered and aching. Forcing himself upright despite the pain, he watched in disbelief as the monster's damaged body began to regenerate before his eyes. A heavy sense of despair settled in his chest. To encounter such a creature in a remote mountain, was this where his life would end? But that despair soon twisted into a bitter, defiant smile. He refused to give up. Clenching his jaw, Cahorn made a decision. If he was destined to die here, then he would drag this abomination down with him. Gathering every last bit of mana he possessed, he focused it into his hand. His plan was simple, a final, desperate attack. He would release it at the exact moment the monster came for the killing blow. The creature lunged toward him again. With a strange shout, Cahorn condensed all the remaining energy in his body into a single blazing point, preparing to strike. Cahorn gathered the last of his strength, concentrating every remaining fragment of mana into his hand. The energy burned fiercely, swelling into a blazing point of power as he braced himself for the monster's charge. The corpse puppet rushed forward, its monstrous claws ready to tear him apart. But just as the impact seemed inevitable, something unexpected happened. A soft blue glow appeared in the forest. In the blink of an eye, a barrier of shimmering blue energy formed between Cahorn and the attacking creature. The monstrous claw struck the barrier and stopped instantly, unable to move forward even an inch. Cahorn stared in stunned disbelief. Around him, small fragments of rock began to float in the air, suspended by an unseen force. The enormous corpse puppet suddenly collapsed onto the forest floor, its grotesque body motionless. The battle had ended almost instantly. Still struggling to process what had just happened, Cahorn heard a familiar voice behind him asking calmly if he was all right. Turning slowly, he saw Tron walking past him with the same quiet composure he had shown the night before. A faint smile appeared on the young shepherd's face as he returned the earlier joke with perfect timing. A shepherd's joke can be quite surprising, Tron said lightly. Cahorn, still dazed from the sudden turn of events, could barely respond. All he managed to say was the young man's name as Tron continued walking away. At that moment, the truth finally settled in his mind. "So, you're a mage," Cahorn said, his voice filled with disbelief. Tron answered simply, "Yes, sir." Cahorn immediately asked why he had never mentioned such a thing before. Tron offered no reply. After a brief pause, the veteran knight adjusted his question. Instead of asking why Tron hid his identity, he asked why the young mage had chosen to help him instead of simply leaving the situation behind. Tron's gaze remained calm as he began to explain. His words brought Cahorn's mind back to a moment from their earlier conversation inside the cabin. During that dinner, Cahorn had once asked why Tron worked so hard for the villagers. At the time, Tron had looked puzzled and asked what he meant. Cahorn had pointed out that with his abilities, Tron could easily earn far more wealth elsewhere and live a much easier life. Tron's answer had been simple: "They're pitiful people." Cahorn had been confused by the remark and asked what exactly made them pitiful. Tron had calmly explained that the villagers lived on the edge of society, constantly trembling in fear without even the most basic protection. Then he had looked directly at Cahorn and said that it wasn't their fault. Those born as mages inherited power that was almost divine. Hearing those words had made Cahorn smile. "If that was the case," he said, "then mages should feel proud to use their strength to protect ordinary people who could not defend themselves." Though he also admitted that not every mage shared such a belief. The memory faded as the present returned. A faint smile appeared on Tron's face. He explained gently that everyone in the world had their own way of living and their own way of thinking. That was simply his answer. Cahorn, however, still couldn't stop thinking about the terrifying creature they had just faced. Images of its overwhelming power flashed through his mind. Shaking his head, he insisted that the monster had been far beyond his ability to handle. At the very least, a noble-ranked mage would normally be required to fight such a beast. He urgently told Tron to inform the village chief so the people could evacuate immediately. Cahorn himself would remain behind to hold the line as long as he could. What he didn't realize was that Tron had already dealt with the situation. For a brief moment, Cahorn remembered the desperation he had felt earlier. He had spoken bravely about fighting to the end, but deep inside he knew he might not have lasted very long. Tron simply replied that everything would be fine. Confused, Cahorn asked what he meant. Nearby, a small rock slowly rose into the air, glowing faintly with magical energy. Tron glanced toward it and calmly added that if his last attack had worked properly, then there was nothing left to worry about. Cahorn frowned, unable to understand what he was implying. Then the realization struck him. His voice trembled as he asked if the attack Tron had just used wasn't even his full strength. The idea was difficult to comprehend. A young mage hiding in the mountains had casually destroyed a corpse puppet that even he couldn't defeat. In that moment, the seasoned knight began to understand something important. This wasn't simply an encounter with a quiet country boy living in a rural village. Nor was it the reckless arrogance of a runaway noble. No, it was something entirely different. Cahorn couldn't fully grasp it yet, but it felt as though he had just witnessed the beginning of a story that might one day shake the world itself. Meanwhile, Tron stood quietly with a confident smile. Deep inside, he admitted to himself that he had also been curious about one thing: his own limits. Not far away, the forest trembled as a gigantic corrupted specter rose into view. The pressure radiating from the creature was overwhelming. The force alone pushed Tron slightly backward. Yet instead of fear, a calm smile spread across his face. To him, this was the perfect opportunity to discover exactly how far his power could go. From a distance, Cahorn shouted urgently for him to stop. Even with his remarkable talent, facing such a monster alone was far too dangerous. They should fight it together instead. But just as the knight prepared to move forward and assist him, the spectre suddenly launched a violent attack directly toward Cahorn. Before the spectre's attack could strike its target, Tron moved. His body flashed forward with astonishing speed. A surge of power burst from him as he intercepted the incoming strike, the collision sending a thunderous shock through the forest. Yet the moment the energy dispersed, Tron realized something was wrong. His attack had done nothing. From behind him, Cahorn shouted the harsh truth. Physical force alone could not destroy a spectre. The creature continued advancing, unaffected. Recognizing the situation, Tron calmly asked how such a monster was supposed to be killed. Cahorn immediately raised his hand and revealed the creature's weakness. Specters could only be destroyed by powerful elemental energy. Fire was the most reliable method, though lightning could also work. To demonstrate, the veteran mage conjured a blazing fireball and hurled it toward the monster. The sphere of flame struck the specter directly in the shoulder, but the creature barely reacted. Watching the failed attempt, Tron remarked calmly that Cahorn's attack hadn't worked either. Frustration crept into Cahorn's voice as he responded sharply. That wasn't the point. He began explaining one of the fundamental principles of magic. To harm a living being, a mage had to establish causality, the connection between the spell and its intended effect. As he spoke, disbelief filled his mind. Tron didn't seem to know something so basic. A disturbing realization suddenly crossed his thoughts. Cold sweat formed on his brow. If Tron truly didn't understand such a simple concept, then the young man must have defeated the original magical beast without even knowing the basic laws of magic. That meant he had probably never absorbed mana properly in his life. Shaking off the shock, Cahorn gave a clear instruction. Tron shouldn't simply ignite existing fire. He needed to create the flame himself and then release it as an attack. Even as he spoke, the knight couldn't stop wondering how someone so untrained could possess such incredible power. Tron nodded slightly and prepared to try again, this time following the older mage's guidance. He focused carefully. A moment later, a bright flame flickered to life in the palm of his hand, appearing from nothing but raw mana. The fire crackled with pure energy. Cahorn watched closely. Conjuring a spark was simple for most mages, but controlling it properly required years of discipline. Yet what happened next left him speechless. With effortless precision, Tron shaped the small flame into a swirling vortex of fire. The blazing spiral expanded rapidly, growing into a massive torrent of burning energy. The level of control he displayed was something most mages would spend years learning. Tron planted his feet firmly against the ground and gathered all his focus. Then he released the attack. A devastating wave of flames erupted from his hand, racing toward the specter like a blazing storm. The fire struck the creature directly, engulfing its glowing eye in a raging inferno. Within seconds, the monster began twisting violently as the flames consumed it. Its unnatural body started to break apart under the relentless heat. Seeing the opportunity, Cahorn shouted urgently for Tron to keep concentrating. The flames needed to be sustained with constant mana, otherwise the specter might regenerate. It had to be burned completely. Tron remained focused, feeding more energy into the raging vortex of fire. His gaze stayed steady as the inferno intensified, devouring the specter piece by piece. The roaring blaze grew stronger until nothing of the creature remained but ash. When the flames finally faded, the forest fell silent once again. Cahorn looked upward in disbelief. They had won. Even now, he struggled to process what he had just witnessed. The specter they had faced was powerful enough that it normally required a noble-class mage to defeat. And yet this young shepherd from the mountains had destroyed it. Standing among the blackened remains, Tron quietly wondered if the battle was truly over. Still stunned, Cahorn warned him that the fight wouldn't be complete unless the remaining mana was absorbed. Otherwise the specter might regenerate. Tron admitted he didn't know how to do that and simply asked what he should try. Cahorn's answer was straightforward. Tron only needed to imagine drawing the energy into himself. Following the instruction, Tron closed his eyes and focused. Almost immediately, the faint green energy lingering within the specter's remains began to move. The residual mana flowed out from the corpse and drifted toward Tron's hand, forming a swirling sphere of concentrated power. His eyes suddenly opened again. They now glowed with a vivid green light as the gathered energy poured into him. A brilliant glow spread through Tron's body as the absorbed mana surged within him. It felt as if every part of him was being filled with an immense and unfamiliar power. The intensity of the sensation forced his eyes to widen. Cahorn watched closely and explained that absorbing mana often brought with it a strange sense of exhilaration. Even as he spoke, however, he struggled to believe what he was seeing. With visible amazement, he asked if this was truly the first time Tron had ever absorbed mana from a monster. Tron answered calmly that it was. The revelation left Cahorn deep in thought. Normally, a mage's mana gradually increased over time after their first awakening. The fastest way to grow stronger was by defeating magical creatures and absorbing the energy they left behind. But if this was Tron's very first time doing so, then something about the situation was extraordinary. Despite never having absorbed mana before, Tron had already demonstrated a level of magic far beyond what most mages could achieve. There was only one explanation. His natural potential existed on an entirely different level. Cahorn stared silently at his own hand, slowly grasping the significance of what he had just witnessed. The young man standing before him was far from an ordinary shepherd. After a moment, he spoke again, addressing Tron by name. Tron looked toward him attentively, responding with a slightly more respectful tone than before. Cahorn began with an apology. He admitted that he might have spoken rudely earlier. Then he asked a question that carried far greater weight than it first seemed. Which noble house did Tron belong to? Tron blinked in confusion, not quite understanding the meaning behind the question. Instead of answering directly, he noticed the blood still dripping from Cahorn's injured arm and pointed it out. The wound needed attention first. The reminder pulled Cahorn out of his thoughts. Accepting the help, he allowed Tron to guide him back to the cabin. Once inside, Tron carefully cleaned the injury and wrapped the arm with bandages. Throughout the process, Cahorn remained quiet, his mind still occupied by the impossible power he had just witnessed in the forest. Later, as Tron prepared dinner, Cahorn apologized once again. He felt it was improper for someone of such ability to be serving him like a guest. Tron quickly dismissed the idea. In his eyes, he was nothing special, just a shepherd living quietly on the hill. He even admitted that he didn't know who his father was. Then he asked Cahorn seriously to stop treating him as if he were someone important. Seeing the firmness in his expression, Cahorn nodded in agreement, though the curiosity in his mind remained. Still, he couldn't help asking why someone with such overwhelming power would choose to live the life of a simple shepherd. It didn't seem like a life meant for someone like Tron. Tron revealed the reason without hesitation. It had been his mother's final request before she passed away. The promise he made to her was to live quietly and never reveal his power. She had warned him that if the people of the lowlands discovered his abilities, they would eventually use him and discard him when he was no longer needed. After hearing this, Cahorn simply remarked that Tron's mother had been a wise woman. The response surprised Tron. He had expected Cahorn to call such a warning excessive or overly protective. Instead, the knight assured him that she hadn't been wrong. Great power inevitably drew conflict. To illustrate his point, Cahorn spoke about a war that had occurred a little more than 20 years earlier. It had been a brutal conflict between two powerful noble houses, House Arabian, the one he had served, and the great House Sar. His expression darkened as he recalled those events. Countless lives had been lost during that war. Out of the roughly 3,000 knights who once served House Arabian, more than 900 had died in the fighting. Nearly a third of their forces had vanished. His voice grew heavier as he continued. Tragically, nearly everyone he had been close to had been among those who fell. The revelation left Tron speechless. Cahorn remembered one of his friends named Diaro, who had dreamed of opening a small laundry shop after the war ended. Another comrade, Hartman, had often scolded him for still having much to learn. And worst of all, the people he loved most, his wife and his son, had also been killed during the massacre carried out by House Sar. He alone had survived. That was why he believed Tron's mother had been right. The life of a knight could disappear far more easily and far more meaninglessly than that of an ordinary person. However, Cahorn added that there was one thing she had been mistaken about. Tron looked at him with confusion. Cahorn admitted that even though he felt embarrassed saying it after the battle he had just lost, he was still considered a skilled knight. Yet Tron had effortlessly destroyed a specter that he himself could not defeat. That meant Tron's potential was far beyond the level of a knight. At the very least, his ability stood equal to that of a noble mage. And even among nobles, such talent would be extraordinarily rare. Tron looked genuinely confused by Cahorn's explanation. If what he said was true, then did that mean his mother had been wrong when she claimed his father was only a knight? Cahorn shook his head gently and clarified the matter. In rare situations, a child with lesser potential could be born into a noble family, while the opposite could also happen. A child with noble-level talent might appear in the bloodline of a knight. Such exceptions were unusual, but they did exist. After explaining this, Cahorn slowly stood up and looked toward the door. With a thoughtful tone, he suggested that perhaps it would be better for Tron to leave the hill and step out into the wider world. Naturally, Tron asked why he should do that. Cahorn's answer was straightforward. Humanity needed more capable nobles and knights. Despite what many believed, humans were not yet the uncontested rulers of the world. Long ago, the gods had driven other races away from the surface, but those races had never truly disappeared. They still lingered in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to return. Yet while such dangers remained, the noble houses continued wasting their strength by fighting among themselves. Because of that, the current era desperately needed powerful and compassionate nobles, people like Tron. But Cahorn didn't stop there. He asked a more personal question instead. Was Tron truly satisfied with the life he lived now, quietly raising sheep on a lonely hill? The question left Tron silent. For a moment, he thought carefully about it. What exactly would he gain by leaving the mountain behind? Cahorn answered that it depended entirely on what Tron desired. Wealth, fame, influence, companionship, or even family. Those things were difficult, if not impossible, to find while living alone in isolation. As he walked toward the door, Cahorn continued describing the possibilities. Tron could travel across the land the way he did, hunting dangerous monsters. He might become an explorer, venturing into unknown territories. There was even the chance that a noble house could adopt him, allowing him to rise within the ranks of power. Eventually, Tron stepped outside the cabin and looked out at the quiet land around him. Cahorn spoke again, half amused by his own words. Now that he thought about it, almost any of those paths sounded far more exciting than spending every day tending sheep. For the first time, Tron admitted something honestly. He did feel curious about the world beyond the mountain. Cahorn smiled at that answer, clearly pleased. Still, he was careful not to push too hard. He promised that whatever decision Tron made, he would support it. Then, without warning, he changed the topic entirely. He asked Tron what his bloodline ability was. Tron blinked in confusion. He had no idea what Cahorn meant. Realizing his mistake, Cahorn quickly apologized again, remembering that Tron knew very little about the deeper aspects of magic. He explained that a bloodline ability was a special trait inherited from one's ancestors. In fact, possessing such an ability was what truly separated nobles from ordinary knights. To help narrow it down, Cahorn asked if there was any particular spell that seemed unusually easy for Tron to perform, or perhaps some remarkable skill he possessed that didn't rely on magic at all. Tron paused to think. For a moment, he wondered if his physical strength counted. Cahorn shook his head and explained that simply having mana naturally enhanced a mage's body, so that wasn't unusual. After giving the matter some thought, Tron finally answered. He admitted that he had a particularly sharp sense of smell, and that he was quite skilled at throwing stones. Cahorn considered Tron's answer carefully. A heightened sense of smell could certainly qualify as a bloodline trait. As for his skill with throwing stones, that detail caught the knight's attention as well. Mastery with thrown weapons had long been associated with House Arabian, although it was a fairly common ability among its members. Still curious, Cahorn asked Tron to explain more about how he used that skill. Tron, puzzled by the sudden curiosity, simply described it the best he could. As he spoke, Cahorn's expression gradually changed. Tron noticed the shift immediately and asked what was wrong. The knight slowly clenched his fist. A troubling thought had begun forming in his mind, one that he could no longer ignore. When Tron asked again why he seemed so unsettled, Cahorn looked directly at him and said that he believed he might know which noble house Tron's abilities resembled the most. A tight feeling spread through Tron's chest. He asked quietly which house he meant. Cahorn's face turned solemn. He explained that it was a powerful lineage, one famous for producing hunters and trackers of exceptional ability. As he prepared to speak the name, memories of the war returned to his mind, the bloodshed, the losses, the devastation. Finally, he said it aloud. House Sahar. The name lingered heavily between them, carrying the weight of history and old hostility. It was the same great house that had once fought a brutal war against House Arabian. Tron froze. For a moment, he could only stare in silence as the final piece of the puzzle settled into place. The possibility that he belonged to the same house responsible for so much suffering left him shaken. He looked toward Cahorn, struggling to process the realization. The thought that he might share blood with the enemies of the very man who had just saved his life filled him with an unexpected sense of guilt. Words failed him. Should he apologize for the actions of people he had never even met, relatives who were nothing more than strangers to him? Cahorn gently called his name, pulling him out of his thoughts. Tron responded quietly, addressing the older man with respectful formality. The knight placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder and told him not to look so troubled. His voice carried no bitterness or resentment. Even so, Tron couldn't shake the feeling of responsibility. He insisted that he had nothing to do with the war, yet the thought of being judged because of his blood weighed heavily on him. Cahorn only smiled calmly. With the quiet wisdom of someone who had lived through too much conflict, he explained that such matters belong to the world of adults and politics. Trying to cleanse bloodshed with more blood only created an endless chain of hatred. Tron looked at him with genuine curiosity and asked if he truly felt no regret at all. Cahorn seemed confused by the question and asked what he meant. The young man reminded him of the advice he had given earlier, encouraging Tron to leave the mountain and experience the world beyond it. Cahorn explained that if Tron chose to pursue power with his extraordinary abilities, it was almost inevitable that he would eventually be drawn toward House Sahar. Even so, the knight said he trusted Tron completely. The statement surprised him. Cahorn reminded him that Tron had saved his life despite the risk of revealing the secret he had hidden his entire life. A person capable of such a choice, he believed, possessed the character to rise above old grudges. If someone like Tron someday gained influence within House Sahar, perhaps he could prevent another war like the one that had destroyed so many lives. Tron listened quietly, absorbing the weight of that possibility. Trying to ease the atmosphere, Cahorn told him not to think about it too seriously yet. After all, Tron hadn't even decided what he wanted to do. But Tron interrupted him. His thoughts had already settled. Cahorn looked at him with curiosity, noticing the determination in the young man's eyes. With quiet confidence, Tron announced that he had made his choice. He wanted to leave the mountain and see the world for himself. A satisfied smile appeared on Cahorn's face. He approved of the decision but advised Tron not to rush into things too quickly. The timing wasn't right yet. Tron then added something that deeply touched the old knight. He said he would only descend from the mountain after Cahorn's injury had completely healed. Cahorn tried to dismiss the wound as nothing more than a scratch, but his voice softened when he realized how sincerely Tron cared. Soon afterward, the two returned inside the cabin, where an entirely different activity began. Cahorn decided it was time to teach Tron the basics of magic. He began by explaining the most essential requirement for any spell: mana, often referred to as the key that allowed a mage to wield extraordinary power. Tron repeated the concept quietly, listening with full attention. Cahorn clarified that mana itself wasn't unlimited power. To perform magic, a person needed mana that was compatible with the spell they wished to use. Sitting at the table, Tron asked what determined that compatibility. In response, Cahorn raised 3 fingers. He explained that the difficulty and effectiveness of magic were shaped by 3 main factors: bloodline, affinity, and causality. Cahorn began the next part of the lesson by speaking about bloodline. According to him, it was a form of inherited power passed down through one's family. Many nobles possessed such abilities, even those who were not trained knights. The strength of that blood determined how naturally a person could wield certain forms of magic. To make the concept clearer, Cahorn asked Tron a simple question: whether he believed he could heal the knight's wound using magic. Tron thought for a moment before admitting that it would be extremely difficult for him. The limitation, he realized, came from his own bloodline. Cahorn nodded and offered an example. In the southern regions there existed a noble family known for their extraordinary magical heritage. Members of the Rabi lineage could perform certain spells almost effortlessly, even without formal training. Those abilities flowed naturally through their blood, making those specific forms of magic feel as instinctive as breathing. Carefully absorbing the explanation, Tron asked about the second factor Cahorn had mentioned earlier: affinity. The knight explained that affinity referred to familiarity. A mage found it easier to perform actions that felt natural or closely resembled something they were already accustomed to doing. Tron immediately connected the idea to his own experience. When he had first created a fireball, it had felt strangely similar to throwing a stone. Cahorn confirmed that his understanding was correct. If Tron had simply tried to conjure flames out of thin air without any familiar motion or reference, the result would have been far weaker and far slower to manifest. Finally, Cahorn introduced the last concept: causality. He admitted that it was the most complicated aspect of magic, one so difficult that even he did not claim to fully understand it. To demonstrate the idea, he described a hypothetical situation. If Tron attempted to kill him directly with mana, simply wishing for the knight's death, the result would likely be nothing more than a weak and useless spell. To illustrate his point, Cahorn gathered a small amount of mana and directed it toward a cup resting on the table. The water inside reacted only slightly, producing a few faint bubbles. The knight explained that without a proper cause leading to the desired outcome, magic struggled to produce results. When the chain between cause and effect was unclear or unnatural, the spell became inefficient and weak. From his seat, Tron considered the explanation carefully. After a moment, he said he believed he understood what Cahorn meant. He raised his hand and formed a small flame in his palm. Instead of attempting to kill the knight directly with mana, he explained that it would make more sense to create a fire and launch it as an attack. Fire was a natural cause that could logically lead to harm, making the magical process far more effective. Cahorn stood up abruptly, clearly impressed. The young man had grasped an abstract principle that many students struggled with for years. Half joking, the knight remarked that Tron might have made an excellent scholar rather than a mage. But Tron had another question. If he could easily control ordinary animals with his abilities, why did magical beasts behave differently? Cahorn explained that the difference came from their mana. Magical creatures possess their own internal power, which made them far less susceptible to the kind of influence Tron could exert on normal animals. Their discussion continued quietly inside the cabin. Outside the window, one of the sheep in the yard seemed to stare toward the house, as if silently listening to the conversation. After a while, Tron let out a quiet sigh and admitted that magic was far more complicated than he had expected. Cahorn agreed. A truly skilled mage, he explained, did more than simply wield mana. They understood the deeper principles that governed how magic functioned. Another thought crossed Tron's mind. He asked whether the Sahar bloodline possessed its own unique magical ability. Cahorn confirmed that it did. Members of that house were famous for their mastery of stealth and tracking. Encouraging him to experiment, the knight suggested that Tron attempt to use it. Tron rose from his chair and accepted the challenge. Closing his eyes, he focused on a simple intention. He did not want to be seen. Then he refined the idea further. He wished for his presence to disappear completely. No visible form, no scent, and no sound that could reveal him. For a brief moment, a faint glow surrounded him as his mana responded to his will. The power hidden within his bloodline awakened. Cahorn turned toward him with curiosity, waiting to see the result. Then he realized something strange. Terran was gone. Only a faint trace of light lingered on the floor where the young mage had been standing moments earlier. The veteran knight could not hide his shock. A cold bead of sweat formed on his forehead as he admitted aloud that Terran had succeeded. He could not see him at all. Despite years of experience on the battlefield, the ability was so perfect that it unsettled him. The room that had been occupied by two people moments before now felt completely empty. Terran's concealment was absolute. Suddenly, the air shifted slightly, and Terran appeared again just as quietly as he had vanished. He clenched his fist, feeling the power flowing through his blood. Even he admitted that such an ability was frightening. It reminded him that this very power had once been the thing the Knights of Arabian feared the most during the war. Kian agreed that the skill was overwhelmingly powerful. Still, he warned Terran not to become overconfident. No ability was truly unbeatable, and there were methods that could counter it. With the demonstration finished, Kian offered to teach him several techniques that would help improve his magical training. Terran hesitated for a moment before speaking. Being fully aware of his own lineage, he quietly asked whether Kian was not revealing too much knowledge to someone from a family that had once been his enemy. Kian turned his back for a moment before answering. He reminded Terran that the young man had saved his life and taken care of him when he needed help. That alone was enough reason for him to offer guidance. Then the knight placed a hand over his chest and looked directly at him with unwavering sincerity. What mattered to him most was something he had already said before. He trusted Terran's character. And to him, that trust outweighed any hostility that existed in the past. The scene quietly shifted as their conversation came to an end. Terran descended into the village to inform everyone that he was leaving. The moment the village chief, rabbis, heard the news, disbelief quickly turned into anger. Terran stood there calmly, already dressed for travel, his belongings prepared for the journey ahead. In contrast, rabbis raised his voice in frustration, scolding him for making such a decision without speaking to anyone first. The chief demanded to know who would take care of the sheep if the young shepherd simply walked away. Terran listened without reacting. His expression remained cold, far colder than the villagers had ever seen before. When rabbis finished shouting, Terran answered in a steady voice. Finding a new shepherd, he said, was not his responsibility, and whatever he chose to do with his own property was none of their concern. Then he gave them a simple choice. They could purchase the sheep from him for a fair price, or he would release the entire flock and walk away, leaving the village to deal with the chaos themselves. The villagers fell silent. One man attempted to appear brave, claiming they could simply capture the sheep on their own if it came to that. Yet his voice shook as he glanced nervously toward Chief Rabbis, clearly hoping for support. Rabbis silenced him instantly with a harsh glare. Unlike the others, the chief understood something important. Terran was not bluffing. The young man had always been someone who kept his word, and pushing him further would only make matters worse. After a long pause, Rabbis finally sighed. "Fine. I understand," he muttered. He handed Terran a heavy pouch filled with coins. The matter was settled. Not long after, Terran left the village alongside Kian. Behind them remained the only home Terran had ever known. As they traveled down the road, Kian asked whether Terran wanted him to collect the remaining compensation. The villagers still owed him more for everything they had done. Terran shook his head. He explained that he had never planned to accept such payment in the first place. Besides, it was Kian who had defeated the magical beast Noel. The reward rightfully belonged to him. Kian accepted the answer without argument. After walking together for some time, Terran spoke again with a faint smile. It was time for them to go their separate ways. Soon they reached a fork in the road. Kian stopped and glanced at the two paths stretching in different directions. This was where their journey together ended. With a small, apologetic smile, Kian explained that he would decline Terran's earlier suggestion that they travel together. He simply preferred wandering alone. Terran was not offended at all. Instead, he thanked him sincerely for everything he had done. Kian returned the smile, his expression carrying a hint of something almost fatherly. He wished Terran well and told him to stay safe on the road ahead. Terran nodded and replied that he hoped the next time they met it would be under better circumstances. He remained standing there for quite some time, watching as Kian's figure slowly disappeared into the forest until the old knight was no longer visible. Only later did Terran begin to understand why he had never felt comfortable addressing Kian with stiff formality. A memory from childhood surfaced in his mind. Although he had never been deprived of his mother's love, love. There had always been a quiet emptiness in his heart. Deep down, he had longed for someone else, a father figure. Someone strong enough to guide him. Someone whose example he could follow as he grew into adulthood. Without realizing it, Kian had quietly filled that empty space during the short time they had traveled together. With that farewell, Terran's past was left behind, like footprints erased by the desert wind. His real journey had finally begun. That journey soon led him to a harsh, barren landscape known as the Rocky Crack Canyon. The wasteland stretched endlessly around him, silent except for the constant whistle of the wind. Wrapped in a new cloak and carrying his pack over his shoulder, Terran walked forward alone across the desert. The wind blew fiercely, tugging at his clothes, but he continued onward, adjusting his hood as he explored the unfamiliar world ahead. Then something caught his attention. Far in the distance, movement appeared along the horizon. Terran narrowed his eyes and soon spotted a group of hooded figures traveling together. From what he could see, they looked like merchants moving between settlements. That suited him perfectly. He approached them, hoping only to ask for directions to the nearest city. As he drew closer, the leader of the group stepped forward. The man wore an eye patch and studied Terran carefully before speaking. He demanded to know who Terran was. Terran answered politely, explaining that he was simply a traveler trying to find the closest city. The man pointed down the road they had come from and told him that if he followed it long enough, he would eventually arrive at a city called Muri. Satisfied with the answer, Terran thanked them and turned to continue on his way. Walking past there, a voice called out behind him. One of the men stepped forward and blocked his path. Wearing a threatening smile, he asked if Terran really thought he could walk away so easily after getting what he wanted. Confusion briefly crossed Terran's face. Terran's eyes narrowed as he looked at the man blocking his path. His voice turned firm as he asked what more they expected from him. The bandit responded with crooked reasoning. According to him, whenever someone received something, they were obligated to give something back in return. In that moment, the pretense vanished. The men surrounding Terran dropped their act. Steel flashed as several swords were drawn, and they closed in around him. Their demand was simple: hand over the heavy pack on his back. A cruel laugh echoed from behind him as another man confirmed it. The leader, the one with the eye patch, watched the scene with an arrogant smirk. He mocked Terran's situation and reminded him that they were standing in a desolate wasteland. If someone died out here, no one would bother asking questions. One of the bandits stepped forward and pressed the cold edge of a blade against Terran's throat. They advised him to remove both his cloak and his pack if he wanted to avoid unnecessary suffering. Terran didn't move. Instead, he studied their faces carefully. Now the truth was obvious. These weren't petty thieves hoping to scare a traveler. They were bandits, men who would not hesitate to kill. For a brief moment, a memory surfaced in his mind. He remembered the quiet cabin where he had spoken with Kian. Their discussion about the nature of magic. The lesson about bloodline, affinity, and causality. The demonstration that had revealed how power could be shaped through logic and intent. That memory lingered for only a second, but it reminded him of something important. He possessed power now. Power he had not yet tested in a real fight. When Terran looked back at the men around him, his expression had changed completely. A calm, chilling smile slowly appeared on his face. "I suppose," he said quietly, "I'll have to use you as practice." The bandits burst into laughter, assuming he had lost his mind. Terran ignored them completely, his thoughts already moving ahead. One of the men scoffed and muttered to the leader that the traveler must be delirious, speaking as though he were some kind of mage. Terran didn't answer. Instead, he quietly began gathering mana. A faint green light formed around his hand, swirling like a living current of energy. Then, with a small motion of his fingers, he released it. A violent gust of wind erupted outward. The sudden force kicked up sand and dust, striking the bandits like an invisible wall. Several of them were thrown off balance, struggling to remain on their feet as the wind roared past them. While they fought to steady themselves, Terran calmly observed the result. Manipulating the wind that already existed in the environment was far more efficient than trying to create it from nothing. It required far less mana. The bandits collapsed onto the ground, groaning in shock from the sudden impact. None of them had expected such overwhelming power. But Terran had no intention of stopping. Reaching into his belongings, he removed a small vial filled with water. With another quiet surge of mana, the liquid rose into the air above the flask. In an instant, it froze solid. The water transformed into a sharp shard of ice. Soon several more icy fragments hovered around him, suspended in midair like weapons waiting for command. Terran extended his hand toward the bandits. One of them stared at the floating ice with wide eyes, terror spreading across his face as he finally understood the danger they were in. Before anyone could react, Terran released the spell. The frozen shards shot forward with deadly speed. One of the bandits was struck immediately, the icicle piercing him before he could even attempt to dodge. Taran watched the result carefully. If he had access to a larger source of water, the spell would have been even more effective. Still, launching the ice shards like thrown stones proved both fast and powerful. The display shattered the bandit's confidence. The leader with the eye patch suddenly dropped to his knees. All arrogance vanished from his face as he begged desperately for mercy. At last, he realized the truth. They had attacked a true mage. The remaining bandits quickly followed his example, collapsing onto their knees as well. Panic filled their voices as they pleaded for their lives, promising to give up everything they had. Taran looked down at them. A faint, cold smile remained on his face. Taran moved without hesitation, stepping forward as the bandits continued begging for their lives. Their desperate voices meant nothing to him. Suddenly, he slammed his foot against the ground. The earth answered instantly. Massive pillars of stone burst upward from beneath the sand with explosive force. The jagged spikes shot through the air and impaled the bandits who had been trying to sneak up behind him for a final attack. Their ambush ended before it could even begin. Within seconds, the battlefield fell silent. Bodies hung lifelessly from the towering stone spikes surrounding Taran. Dust drifted through the air as the last echoes of the violent eruption faded away. Only one man remained alive. The leader with the eye patch stood frozen in place, staring at the gruesome scene with wide, horrified eyes. His mind struggled to process what had just happened. Taran stood calmly at the center of the destruction, completely unshaken. The surviving bandit swallowed nervously before asking in a trembling voice whether the others were truly dead. Taran didn't answer directly. Instead, he slowly walked toward the man. "I want to ask you something," he said calmly. The bandit nodded frantically, fear shaking his entire body. At that moment, he was willing to say anything if it meant surviving. Taran's question came without anger. Why had they attacked so recklessly? They had no idea who he was. A lone traveler could easily have been a powerful mage. Yet they had ambushed him without even the slightest preparation. For a moment, the bandit looked confused. Then he explained the reason. It was because Taran had greeted them politely. Despite their rude behavior, he had lowered his head and spoken respectfully. To them, that gesture meant weakness. They assumed he was nothing more than an ordinary traveler, an easy target. Taran listened carefully, his expression thoughtful. For a brief moment, he fell silent. Then he nodded slightly. "Thank you," he said calmly. "I learned something important from that." Hope suddenly flickered inside the bandit's eyes. If Taran was thanking him, maybe he would be spared. The man quickly asked if that meant he would be allowed to live. Taran did not reply. Instead, the bandit slowly lifted his head, and froze. Above him, a small droplet of water had formed in the air. It hovered silently, trembling as if waiting for a command. Terror flooded the bandit's face as he understood what it meant. At that moment, Taran remembered something his master, Kairin, had once told him. Back then, Kairin had warned him that the world was filled with many different kinds of people. Among them were individuals who lived by harming others without hesitation. The old mage had spoken firmly about such people. Bandits, murderers, and thieves who stained their hands with innocent blood should never be shown mercy. Someone like that would never stop hurting others as long as they remained alive. Standing beside the final bandit, Taran finally understood why Kairin had spoken those words so harshly. If he spared one life out of misplaced compassion, that person might go on to harm countless others. One act of mercy today could cost the lives of 10 innocent people tomorrow. With that realization, Taran made his decision. Moments later, the last bandit fell. Silence returned to the wasteland. Taran stood there for a moment, surrounded by the aftermath of the battle. The harsh desert wind carried grains of sand across the ground as if trying to erase the traces of what had happened. Eventually, he turned away. He had already spent enough time here. Following the tracks left behind by the bandit's wagon, Taran began walking through the desert alone. As he continued forward, a thought suddenly surfaced in his mind. I killed people. The reality of it struck him harder than he expected. For a brief moment, guilt tightened around his chest. But he forced himself to remember Kairin's words again. People who robbed and killed without hesitation would only continue doing so. If he had walked away, they would eventually attack someone else, someone weaker who might not survive. Slowly, the turmoil inside his heart began to settle. His resolve hardened. He kept walking along the wagon trail until the harsh desert landscape finally began to change. The endless sand gradually disappeared, replaced by green fields and vibrant vegetation. The dry wind gave way to fresh air filled with the scent of life. Then Taran saw it. In the distance stood a city. For the first time in his life, he gazed upon towering walls, rows of buildings, and a grand castle rising above everything else. A sense of wonder filled his eyes. This was the small city of Muri. As Taran stepped through its entrance, he found himself surrounded by people once again, voices, movement, and the constant rhythm of city life greeting him after so long in isolation. As Taran stepped deeper into the city, the constant noise and restless movement around him quickly became overwhelming. Voices overlapped from every direction, merchants shouting about their goods, people bargaining loudly, carts rattling across the stone streets. The sheer energy of the place left him momentarily stunned. He slowed his pace, watching the crowds with wide eyes. Never in his life had he seen so many people gathered in one place. Even the buildings captured his attention. Towering stone structures lined the streets, their size and design completely unlike the modest homes of the village where he had grown up. Compared to those simple houses, these constructions felt massive and imposing. Walking through the busy marketplace, Taran truly felt as if he had stepped into an entirely different world. After observing the chaos for a while, he approached a nearby fruit stall, hoping to ask for directions. The merchant greeted him immediately with a friendly smile, assuming he had come to buy something. Taran quickly clarified that he only wanted to ask a question. At that moment, he recalled advice his master, Kairin, had once given him. Whenever he arrived in a city and needed a place to stay, the first thing he should search for was an inn. But the moment the vendor realized Taran wasn't planning to purchase anything, the man's attitude changed instantly. His welcoming expression vanished, replaced by irritation. He sharply told Taran to leave. Taran stood there for a moment, confused by the sudden hostility. The reaction made him wonder if cities had some unspoken rule. Perhaps people were expected to buy something before asking questions. Not wanting to cause unnecessary trouble, he decided to follow what seemed to be the custom. He glanced at the fruit and asked the price of a few apples. 2 tupit, the vendor replied. Taran reached into his pouch and pulled out a different coin. The moment the merchant saw it, his eyes narrowed slightly before realization dawned. "You're not from around here," the man said. He then explained that tupit was the currency commonly used in the city, though he added that Taran's coin would still be accepted. Now understanding the situation, Taran handed over the payment and took the apples. Only then did he ask his question again, where he could find an inn. This time, the vendor's behavior changed completely. His tone softened, and he kindly pointed Taran toward a place called PBNN, claiming it was the largest inn in the city. Following the directions, Taran soon arrived at the establishment. When he stepped inside, a cheerful blonde employee greeted him immediately. Her warm smile suggested she was used to welcoming travelers. "Welcome," she said politely. "You look like a distinguished guest." Taran didn't react to the compliment. Instead, he calmly asked the only thing that mattered to him. "How much for one night?" 16 tupit, she replied. He accepted the price without hesitation and paid the amount. After finishing the transaction, he told her he had another question. The employee, whose name was Lena, tilted her head slightly when Taran asked whether there were any monsters nearby with bounties placed on them. His intention was simple. Hunting monsters would allow him to absorb their mana while earning money at the same time, exactly as Kairin had once advised. However, Lena did not answer immediately. Instead, she glanced briefly at the small pouch of coins hanging from Taran's belt, and a faint, knowing smile appeared on her face. Taran frowned slightly, growing impatient with the silence. Lena eventually reminded him of something simple. "In this world," she said lightly, "nothing comes for free." She then led him to another section of the inn where several large notice boards were mounted on the wall. Various papers were pinned there, requests, announcements, and bounties. While explaining how these bounty notices worked, Lena casually mentioned something called the town hall. The term meant nothing to Taran. After sitting down at a nearby table, he directly asked what a town hall was, openly revealing just how unfamiliar he was with the outside world. Lena couldn't help laughing. "You're really from the countryside, aren't you?" she teased. Still, she kindly explained that town halls were places where public affairs were handled. They were offices where the city lord's officials worked and where people went to deal with legal matters or public requests. Unfortunately, she added, the building was probably already closed for the day. If Taran wanted official information about monster bounties, he would have to visit tomorrow. Curious, Lena then asked if he was also a monster hunter. Taran blinked in confusion. "What's a monster hunter?" His question made her raise an eyebrow. Lena explained the popular belief people in the region talked about. According to rumor, if an ordinary person hunted monsters, they might eventually awaken magical abilities and become a mage. She assumed that was Taran's goal as well. Just as she was about to mock the idea as nothing more than superstition, Taran interrupted her. "What do you mean by superstition?" Before Lena could answer, another voice joined the conversation. A tall, broad-shouldered blonde man approached their table. He introduced himself as Mudun. With obvious confidence, he declared that the story was not superstition at all. In fact, he insisted that killing monsters could indeed turn someone into a mage because he had personally witnessed it happen. Lena stared at him in surprise. "Mudun, you're still alive?" The man laughed arrogantly. "I'm not dying until I become a mage," he replied proudly. With a casual and overly familiar gesture, Mudun reached out and patted Taran on the head as if he were talking to a younger boy. Taran ignored the gesture, focusing instead on what Mudun had said. He asked him to explain more about the idea of gaining magic through monster hunting. Before Mudun could launch into another boastful speech, Lena stepped in to explain the reasoning behind the rumor. Since mages often became stronger by defeating monsters, many people believed that ordinary individuals could awaken magic the same way. Mudun quickly confirmed that he and his companions were hunting monsters for exactly that reason. Several men nearby cheered loudly in agreement. Taran looked at them thoughtfully before asking a simple question. "Has anyone here succeeded yet?" Mudun burst out laughing. "Nope." According to him, the entire city only had 4 known mages. The city lord himself and 3 individuals serving under him. As Mudun spoke, his eyes drifted over Taran's clothing and equipment. The simple gear immediately made him skeptical. He scoffed slightly. "Your equipment's pretty poor for a monster hunter," he said. "Do you even have a weapon?" Taran answered calmly. "Yes." He reached into his bag and revealed it. A sling. The moment Mudun saw it, recognition flashed across his face. Mudun examined the sling more closely. The leather looked heavily worn, the kind of wear that only came from frequent use. From that alone, he could tell Taran had practiced with it countless times. Taran explained calmly that the sling allowed him to fire egg-sized stones with remarkable speed. Mudun gave an impressed nod. With accuracy like that, he believed Taran could easily deal with smaller monsters. Realizing the potential advantage, Mudun mentioned that his group had actually been searching for another fighter who could attack from a distance. Seeing an opportunity, he offered Taran a place in their party. Taran responded with a polite smile but refused the invitation. Later that night, alone inside his rented room, he thought about the offer again. In the end, he concluded there was no reason for him to join them. His path and theirs were completely different. Stretching out on the bed, he let out a quiet breath. The day had been exhausting. Everything had changed so quickly that his mind still struggled to keep up. His gaze drifted toward the small backpack resting nearby. Even now, it felt strange to realize he had truly left his village behind, the only home he had ever known. What awaited him in the future? He couldn't say. As he raised his hand slightly, faint streams of mana flowed around his fingers. The visible energy served as a constant reminder of both his ability and the uncertain path ahead. Just then, a soft knocking sound echoed from the door. Taran immediately sat upright, alert. "Who is it?" he asked. No response came. At that moment, another memory surfaced in his mind, one of the many warnings his master, Kairin, had given him before sending him into the world. Even an inn in the middle of a city was not necessarily safe. Being surrounded by people did not guarantee protection. Kairin's final warning echoed clearly in his thoughts. Never lower your guard. Remembering those words, Taran quietly prepared himself for danger. As the door began to open slowly, a small sphere of mana gathered in his palm, ready to be released if necessary. He cautiously watched the narrow gap widen. Then his expression shifted with surprise. Standing at the doorway was Lena. She stepped inside with a playful smile and asked if he had been sleeping. With a light tone, she explained that she thought the room might be cold, so she had come to help keep him warm. Taran simply stared at her, completely puzzled. Lena loosened the ribbon tied at the collar of her uniform and looked at him suggestively. "What do you mean?" Taran asked honestly, clearly not understanding her intention. She blinked at him, repeating his question in disbelief. When he calmly confirmed that he truly did not understand, Lena decided to be direct. She told him plainly that, for the right amount of money, she was willing to do whatever he wanted. Taran interrupted her before she could continue. "What if there's nothing I want?" he asked. Lena stepped closer without hesitation, placing her hand against his chest with confident familiarity. She accused him of lying, claiming she could clearly see desire written across his face. But Taran's expression changed in a way she had never expected. His face became completely calm, empty of emotion, like the serene expression of a statue. There was no embarrassment, no excitement, not even curiosity. The reaction left Lena completely stunned. She could not understand how someone could show such absolute indifference. At that moment, a vivid memory appeared in Taran's mind. He remembered his master shouting a desperate warning from the past. "Don't do it." The memory continued, showing Kairin explaining something seriously to a younger Taran. He had warned him to always be cautious around servants and prostitutes. Even if a mage's body could resist many illnesses, Kairin had explained, those people could still carry diseases and spread them to others. It had been a lesson about discipline and restraint, about not letting momentary desire lead to regret later. Back in the present, Lena finally gave up. Clearly irritated and confused by his strange behavior, she turned and left the room, her footsteps echoing faintly as she walked back down the corridor. Taran lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling. After everything he had experienced today, he was beginning to understand something about life in the city. It was far more complicated than he had imagined. After a long silence, he reached a quiet conclusion. Cities were cold places. In this world, it seemed that even something as simple as a conversation always came with a price. Elsewhere inside the inn, one of the hunters leaned toward his leader with curiosity. He asked Mudun why he had tried to recruit Taran in the first place. From his perspective, the boy didn't look particularly useful. At first, Mudun responded with his usual blunt tone. He remarked that Taran's confident attitude would have made him excellent bait for monsters. But after a moment, his expression softened. He admitted the truth. The boy reminded him of himself when he was younger. Seeing someone so inexperienced wandering alone with nothing more than a crude sling made him uneasy. With a faint, almost nostalgic smile, Mudun confessed that he had only wanted the kid to stay close to him. If Taran traveled with their group, his chances of surviving the dangers outside the city would be much higher. His subordinate sighed helplessly. "You're too kind for your own good," he muttered. In his room upstairs, Taran overheard the entire conversation through the thin walls. A small smile appeared on his face. Learning Mudun's real intentions changed something in his mind. Perhaps the city wasn't as cold as he had first believed. The following day, Taran made his way toward a large building located near the center of the city, most likely the hunter's office where bounties were issued. Inside, a clerk with a thick mustache greeted him from behind the desk. "How can I help you?" the man asked formally. His eyes quickly scanned Taran before he added another question. "Are you an official hunter?" Instead of answering directly, Taran tilted his head slightly. "What do you think?" he replied. Then he stated his purpose plainly. "I'm here to hunt monsters." The word monsters made the clerk pause in surprise. At that moment, Taran recalled another piece of advice from his master. Kairin had once told him that the world would never treat anyone kindly by default. Respect had to be earned or forced. If people discovered someone was a mage, their attitude would immediately change. Ordinary individuals would bow their heads either out of admiration or fear. Remembering those words, Taran placed a document on the desk. The paper bore a distinctive seal. He wanted to see if his master's theory was correct. The clerk glanced at it briefly before sliding a bounty sheet across the counter with little enthusiasm. "Look it over and bring it back when you're done," he said dismissively. Taran ignored the tone and examined the drawing carefully. Studying the image, he raised a question. "Is this supposed to be a monster, or just a crow?" The clerk rolled his eyes. "Does it look like a cat to you?" he replied sarcastically. Then his expression turned serious. He warned Taran that if he managed to kill the creature, he must bring the body back to the city. If a mage did not disperse the mana inside a monster's corpse, the remains could transform into a dangerous specter. According to the city's laws, abandoning such a body was a crime punishable by execution. Taran met his gaze calmly. "I know." A painful memory flashed briefly through his mind. A horrific specter born from such negligence. He understood that danger better than most. There was no chance he would repeat that mistake. Curious, he then asked why the knights themselves didn't handle monster hunting. The clerk scoffed. Knights had more important duties. Their responsibility was to maintain order within the city walls, not chase beasts through forests. As Taran turned to leave, the man added one final remark filled with disdain. "That kind of work is for thugs like you." Watching him walk away, the clerk sighed to himself. In his mind, Taran was just another reckless hunter who would eventually die outside the city like so many others. Deep in the forest, darkness filled the undergrowth. A monstrous crow watched silently from the shadows, one glowing eye scanning the surroundings. But the hunt ended almost instantly. A violent impact struck the creature before it could react. The bird dropped lifelessly to the ground, a massive wound torn straight through its chest. Back at the bounty office, the clerk and his assistant stared down in shock. Taran had returned far sooner than anyone expected. Lying on the floor between them was the corpse of the monster crow. Still stunned, the chief clerk looked up. "You killed it alone?" he asked. "Yes," Taran replied calmly. Without making a big deal of the achievement, he simply asked how he could collect the reward. The clerk's attitude had completely changed. Now visibly nervous, he hurried to prepare the payment. Stammering slightly, he assured Taran that of course he would be compensated. A pouch of coins was quickly handed over, along with a polite suggestion that he must be tired after such hard work. Taran accepted it with a quiet thank you and turned to leave. Behind him, the employees began whispering in amazement. The monster crow's razor-sharp wings were still perfectly intact, valuable materials that were rarely recovered without damage. They couldn't understand how someone had managed to bring back the corpse in such flawless condition. The chief clerk noticed that Taran had paused near the exit. Assuming he was preparing to leave, he asked why he was still standing there. Taran turned around and asked a question that stunned everyone in the room. Are there any other monsters worth hunting? The clerk could only stare at him. After accomplishing such a task, how could this young man still have the strength to continue? Later that evening, back at the inn, Taran sat before a table overflowing with food. Plates of ham, cheese, stew, and mugs of honey mead covered nearly every inch of the surface. Lena served the dishes while staring at him with disbelief. I never imagined someone like you could defeat 30 monsters in just 3 days, she admitted. Taran continued eating calmly. You must have earned a fortune, she added. He didn't react to the comment. For a while, he simply enjoyed the meal he had earned through hard work. Then his expression turned serious. Money isn't what I'm after, he said quietly. What he truly sought was the mana contained within monsters. Images flashed through his mind, moments when he absorbed their energy and felt his strength grow. Since the day he met his master Karen, his mana had multiplied many times over. Yet recently he had begun to sense a limit. If he wished to grow stronger, hunting weak monsters alone would no longer be enough. Lena listened with confusion. His talk about mana meant little to her. Just then, the cook arrived with another man. Both stared at the nearly empty table in disbelief. Did you eat all of that by yourself? The cook asked. He laughed, pointing out how surprising it was for someone so thin to consume such a huge meal. Still, he seemed pleased. It's been a long time since someone enjoyed my cooking this much, he said. Taran nodded politely. It was delicious. The cook grinned. Next time I'll make something even better. For a brief moment, the atmosphere in the inn felt warm and relaxed. But it didn't last. A rough hand suddenly grabbed Taran's shoulder from behind. Several of Mudun's subordinates surrounded his table with threatening smiles. One of them leaned forward. Enjoying yourself, he sneered. That's quite a feast for one person. Another hunter mocked him, calling him a skinny runt. Word had spread that Taran had been earning a good amount of money recently. He was about to demand a share. But Taran moved first. His hand flashed through the air and struck the man across the face. The blow landed so quickly that the hunter stumbled backward in shock. His companions shouted angrily. Taran looked at them coldly. Pressing his palms together as if in prayer, he spoke with dry sarcasm. Isn't that what you wanted? He asked. A little charity? Enraged, another hunter swung his fist directly at Taran's face. Taran caught the punch effortlessly with one hand. The difference in strength was undeniable. A third man rushed forward, lifting a wooden stool and swinging it toward Taran's head. Taran intercepted the incoming stool with ease. He didn't even bother standing up from his chair. The wooden leg stopped mid-swing in his hand. With calm precision, he reached forward and pressed a specific point on the attacker's head. Instantly, the man's face twisted in agony. Cold sweat broke across his forehead as pain shot through his body. Taran then pushed him away with what looked like a light motion. The result was anything but light. The hunter was sent flying backward before crashing onto the floor, completely defeated. Throughout the entire scene, Lena had been watching with a stiff, nervous smile. Finally, she lost her patience. Stop it, she shouted loudly. Don't fight inside my inn. Almost at the exact same moment, the door opened. Mudun entered the room along with the rest of his group. The moment he understood what had happened, he stepped forward without hesitation and bowed deeply toward Taran. I sincerely apologize for my men's behavior, he said. Later that evening, Mudun appeared once more outside Taran's room. After being invited in, he apologized again. He assured Taran that he had already disciplined the men responsible and promised that such behavior would never happen again. Mudun explained the situation honestly. Recently, his group had been struggling financially. Seeing Taran earn money so quickly had likely stirred jealousy among the younger hunters. He then ordered the 2 battered hunters standing behind him to apologize. Both men looked bruised and embarrassed. With obvious reluctance, they managed to mumble a quiet apology. Taran studied them for a moment before asking a simple question. Is your situation really that bad? Mudun shook his head slowly. It's not that severe, he replied. Just tight. His hand clenched slightly as he spoke. In about 3 days, he admitted, we probably won't even be able to pay for our rooms here. He quickly added that it was their own responsibility and not something Taran needed to worry about. To everyone's surprise, Taran calmly reached into his bag and took out a pouch filled with coins. He held it out toward Mudun. "Take it," he said. Mudun stared at the pouch in stunned silence. "Why?" he asked. Taran answered calmly. "It's repayment." He explained that Mudun had shown him genuine concern earlier when he tried to recruit him and worried about him hunting alone. For Taran, that kindness had value. Mudun blinked in confusion. "How did you even know about that?" he asked. A faint smile appeared on Taran's face. "In this world," he said quietly, "nothing is truly free." But the money was not without purpose. In exchange, he wanted only one thing: information. The moment Mudun heard that, his expression brightened immediately. Information gathering was something he excelled at. With a broad grin, he assured Taran that he would share everything he knew. Time passed, and life in the city continued as usual. Hunters came and went, pursuing bounties while the rhythm of daily life carried on. Once again, Taran walked through the forest outside the city. This hunt might be his last one here. During their conversation, Mudun had given him directions and useful details about the next city. Soon it would be time for Taran to move on. As he walked between the trees, he thought about that discussion again. The information Mudun had provided had been far more valuable than he expected. It confirmed what Taran had already suspected. Mudun was genuinely a good person. However, compared to Taran's master Kairin, he lacked experience and cunning. Yet perhaps that very lack of calculation was what made him so sincere. His straightforward nature made him kinder than most. Suddenly, Taran stopped. His thoughts vanished instantly. His eyes widened slightly as his sharpened senses detected something unusual in the air. A scent, sharp and unpleasant. A heavy feeling settled in his chest. He hoped he was mistaken. Without hesitation, Taran dashed forward at full speed through the forest. Following the faint trail, he soon noticed deep claw marks carved violently into the trunk of a nearby tree. Signs of a struggle. A serious one. He stepped into a clearing, mentally preparing himself for the worst. The forest had fallen into complete silence. Then he saw it. A man lay slumped against a tree, lifeless, surrounded by a dark pool of blood. Taran recognized him immediately. His mind raced. Isn't that one of Mudun's men? A cold tension tightened in his chest. His face hardened as he slowly looked around the clearing. There were no voices, no movement, only more bodies. Another hunter lay nearby, his eyes frozen open in a lifeless stare. The truth was obvious. This had not been a simple fight. It was a massacre. The forest that had once served as familiar hunting ground had turned into a graveyard. Among the fallen bodies, Taran noticed something scattered across the blood-stained ground. A few silver coins. He recognized them instantly. They were likely the same coins he had given to Mudun. At last, Taran found Mudun. The man who had shown him unexpected kindness now lay motionless among the fallen hunters. For a moment, Taran simply stared. Then his legs gave way and he dropped to his knees beside the body. Disbelief washed over him, quickly followed by a slow-burning anger. His mind struggled to understand what kind of enemy could have done something like this. As he scanned the clearing again, he noticed movement nearby. A man was slumped against a tree, barely alive. Taran rushed over and knelt beside him. The hunter's body was soaked in blood, his breathing shallow and uneven. With the last of his strength, the man tried to speak. His lips trembled as he struggled to form words, repeating the same broken sound again and again. Taran leaned closer, listening carefully. The wounded hunter forced his eyes open and lifted his blood-covered face. Gathering every bit of strength he had left, he finally managed to finish the word. "Rabbit." Taran frowned, confused. A rabbit? Before he could question it further, a wet, sickening sound reached his ears. His head turned sharply toward the source. There, a rabbit was crouched in the clearing. Its mouth was stained dark with blood as it chewed noisily on something. The dying hunter's warning had been correct. That creature was no ordinary animal. It was a monster. As Taran looked around, the full horror of the scene became clear. Bodies were scattered across the clearing, torn apart by brutal force. And at the center of it all stood the cause. A gigantic rabbit with a demonic appearance. Its white fur was smeared with blood, its claws dripping red. Two glowing crimson eyes stared forward with chilling malice. After witnessing the devastation, Taran slowly rose to his feet. There was no doubt in his mind. He couldn't simply walk away from this. Without warning, the monstrous rabbit attacked. Its speed was terrifying. The creature shot forward in a blur, dirt and debris erupting behind it. Taran barely reacted in time. His eyes widened slightly. "It's fast." He twisted his body and avoided the strike at the very last moment. The rabbit landed several steps away and turned toward him again, watching carefully. Taran silently admitted that the attack had nearly hit him. He didn't waste another moment. Raising his hand, he formed a transparent barrier of mana in front of him. Blue energy gathered rapidly as he focused his power. With a sharp motion, he released the attack. A glowing projectile flew forward before splitting into multiple fragments that raced toward the monster. But the rabbit moved with astonishing agility. It leapt and twisted through the air with unnatural grace, evading the attacks one after another. Some of the energy shards shattered against the ground while others missed entirely. Terran's expression grew serious. This wasn't a typical monster. It clearly had experience fighting against ranged attacks. The creature suddenly slammed its feet against the ground with force. Then it launched itself high into the air. Its massive shadow stretched over Terran as it rose above him. Its glowing red eyes locked onto him with clear killing intent. The monster intended to crush him, but when it came crashing down, Terran was no longer there. The confused beast turned quickly, searching for its target. A moment later, Terran appeared above it. He dropped from the air with deadly precision. A dagger was clenched tightly in one hand while the other gathered concentrated energy. Without hesitation, he drove the blade deep into the monster's neck. The rabbit let out a piercing shriek as blood burst from the wound in its neck. Terran landed lightly a short distance away and watched the creature stumble. The monster struggled to steady itself, but the damage was already severe. Before it could regain its footing, Terran moved again. His figure blurred and vanished from sight. In the next instant, he appeared directly in front of the beast. Gathering all his strength, he delivered a crushing strike. The impact drove the rabbit's head violently into the ground. A powerful shockwave rippled outward, sending the enormous body hurtling across the clearing and smashing through nearby trees. Dirt, splinters, and dust exploded into the air. From within the cloud of debris came the monster's final scream. When the dust slowly settled, the creature lay motionless. Blood spread beneath its body while its claws trembled weakly for a moment before going still. Its tongue hung from its mouth, and the crimson glow faded from its lifeless eyes. The fight was over. Terran walked toward the corpse in silence. Standing over the fallen monster, he extended his hand. Mana began to flow. A vivid green aura surged out of the rabbit's body and streamed into him, surrounding him completely as he absorbed the energy. As the power entered his body, Terran immediately noticed something unusual. The amount of mana was enormous. It was far greater than what he had expected, greater even than the energy he had once gained from the leopard monster he fought earlier. His eyes widened slightly in disbelief. Gaining this much power from a single creature was something he had not anticipated. When the process ended, Terran lowered his hand and turned toward the wounded hunter who had survived long enough to witness the battle. The man stared at him with awe. "You're a mage," he whispered weakly. Terran confirmed it with a small nod. Still confused, the injured hunter asked why someone so powerful would hide their identity. Terran did not answer. Instead, he asked a different question. "Do any of them have families?" he said quietly, glancing toward the fallen hunters. "Someone who should receive their belongings." Tears gathered in the man's eyes. "No," he replied softly. As his strength faded, his thoughts drifted to his leader. Mudon. A memory surfaced. Mudon had once spoken enthusiastically about a nearby city called Orem. It was a grand place, he had said, famous for a magnificent library. At the time, Terran had shown little interest. But when Mudon mentioned that the library contained thousands of books, Terran had finally looked up. Mudon noticed immediately. Although Terran tried to appear indifferent, his curiosity had been sparked. Then Mudon added another important detail. Not everyone could enter the library. That statement had caught Terran's full attention. "How does someone gain access?" he had asked. Mudon's answer was simple. "Only mages are allowed inside." The memory faded. Back in the present, Terran stood before a row of freshly dug graves. The fallen hunters had been laid to rest beneath the quiet forest. After a long moment of silence, Terran made his decision. He would go to Orem. Before leaving, he paused beside Mudon's grave. Softly, he spoke the man's name. "Mudon, I hope you found peace." With that quiet farewell, Terran turned away from the makeshift cemetery and began his journey toward the city of mages. Time passed. Eventually, Terran arrived at Orem. The massive city was alive with movement. People filled the streets, merchants called out from their stalls, and travelers moved through crowded avenues. Blending into the busy crowd, Terran quietly observed everything around him. Wearing his worn traveler's clothes, he felt slightly out of place. Compared to this enormous metropolis, the small city of Muri, once so impressive to him, now seemed insignificant. At the heart of Orem stood a massive castle-like structure surrounded by a well-organized and prosperous city. Terran eventually joined the long line of people waiting to pass through the heavily guarded gates. The security was far stricter than he had expected. Guards carefully inspected each traveler, checking them one by one. Watching them work, Terran wondered if they were searching for criminals. When his turn finally arrived, a guard suddenly raised his voice. "Stop." Terran looked at him, puzzled. "What's the problem?" he asked. The guard pointed at him with clear disdain, eyeing his dusty, worn clothing. "Look at yourself," the man scoffed. "Clean up before you try entering this city." Taran didn't bother responding. Instead, his gaze drifted upward. In the distance, a towering white structure rose above the city skyline. Strange vines clung to its surface as it stretched high into the sky. Taran studied it carefully. That must be the library Mudun mentioned. His destination stood right before him. Judging by its enormous scale, he was certain it had been constructed using powerful magic. Without hesitation, he walked toward the grand entrance. 2 guards stood watch beside the large ornate doors. Taran approached them calmly. "I'd like to enter," he said. The guard responded immediately, his voice firm. "Entry is restricted," he said. "Only mages are permitted inside." Taran remained calm. "I am a mage," he said simply. For a moment, the guard in front of him was completely speechless. Another guard nearby reacted very differently. Kenya's expression darkened with irritation as he stepped forward. He glared at Taran as if he had just heard something outrageous. "Have you lost your mind?" Kenya snapped. "Pretending to be a mage is not something you joke about. If you value your life, stop this nonsense." In his eyes, it was impossible for someone dressed like Taran to belong to the ranks of mages. As he reached out to stop him from moving any further, Taran casually raised his arm. Kenya's hand was blocked with effortless ease. Then something strange happened. A faint red glow began to form around Taran's hand. Kenya froze where he stood. Confusion filled his eyes as he stared at the energy gathering there. Taran recalled something he had once heard, that mages were able to sense the presence of mana from one another. With a single glance, they could even estimate the strength of another mage. Curious, Taran decided to test the idea. He released only the smallest portion of his power. The effect was immediate. A dense wave of crimson mana spread outward, pressing down like an invisible weight. Kenya's eyes widened in shock. The pressure struck him like a physical blow. It was unlike anything he had ever felt before. His legs trembled as the overwhelming force pushed him backward. Within seconds, he collapsed onto the ground. His body shook uncontrollably, completely overpowered by the sheer intensity of the mana. The other guard rushed to his side in alarm. "Kenya, are you alright?" Kenya struggled to breathe but managed a weak nod. Taran stood calmly nearby, watching the scene without expression. Slowly, the truth dawned on Kenya. He had made a serious mistake. The man standing before him was not an ordinary mage. The power he had just felt suggested a level of strength equal to, or even greater than, that of the noble mage families. Still shaken, Kenya forced himself to sit up. "My apologies," he said respectfully, his voice unsteady. "I am Kenya of House Baltos." He bowed his head slightly. "May I ask which house you belong to, sir?" A faint smile appeared on Taran's face. "Is revealing that really necessary just to enter the building?" he asked. Kenya hesitated. "No, it isn't," he admitted. However, there was still a problem. To use the library, Kenya continued carefully, one must have permission from the head of House Baltos. Taran frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" Kenya straightened himself and answered respectfully. "I will send word to House Baltos immediately," he said. "They must be informed of your arrival." The scene shifted. Taran now sat inside a large bath filled with steaming water. He let out a quiet sigh as he sank deeper into it. In the end, he had accepted the guard's proposal. Even so, he couldn't shake the feeling that things had become far more complicated than he had anticipated. He had thought entering the library would be simple. Instead, he was now being treated like an honored noble guest. A young maid stood nearby, her face flushed with nervousness as she waited to attend to him. Carefully, the servants began washing him, handling their task with the utmost respect. The room itself was lavish. Smooth marble walls surrounded the bath, scented oils filled the air, and gentle candlelight flickered across the chamber. Taran felt completely out of place. As he sat in the enormous bath, he wondered how he had somehow ended up in such an awkward situation. All the attention made him uncomfortable. At last, he raised a hand. "That's enough," he said. The maids froze immediately. Fear flickered across their faces. Taran looked at them, puzzled. "Is there a problem if I wash myself?" he asked. The head maid quickly shook her head. "No, sir. But if we fail to properly serve such an important guest, we will be punished." Taran paused for a moment. Then he sighed quietly. "Fine," he said. "Do as you wish." Relief washed over the maids' faces. "Thank you, sir," they replied softly before continuing their work. Meanwhile, the grand residence of House Baltos stood proudly within the city, its towering structure reflecting the wealth and authority of the noble family. Later, after the bath was finished, Taran was dressed in elegant clothing befitting a noble guest. As he stepped out, one of the maids looked at him and couldn't hide her amazement. "Wow, incredible," she whispered before she realized she had spoken aloud. Embarrassed, she quickly covered her mouth. Taran, however, seemed completely unaware of the commotion around him. Taran finished tying his hair into a neat ponytail, adjusting the ribbon carefully. When he noticed the maid staring at him, he tilted his head slightly. "Is something wrong?" he asked, touching his face. "Do I have something on it?" The young maid closest to him immediately panicked. Her hands trembled as she bowed her head. "My apologies, sir," she said nervously. "I was just surprised." After a moment of hesitation, she admitted the truth. "It's because you're very handsome." The other maids standing behind her lowered their heads shyly, silently agreeing with her words. Taran only gave a faint, polite smile. "There's no need to apologize," he replied calmly. But the maid quickly shook her head. "Please don't speak to us so casually," she said. "Our positions are not the same." The reminder of their difference in status only made the situation feel even stranger to him. Taran looked at his reflection for a moment. With the elegant clothing and neatly styled hair, his appearance had changed greatly. The small beauty mark beneath his eye stood out clearly against his refined features. What exactly is going on here? He wondered. Just then, the door opened. A young woman stepped inside. Her pink hair swayed gently as she walked forward with confident steps. Without hesitation, she studied Taran from head to toe. A teasing smile appeared on her lips. "So you're the guest who arrived looking like a beggar," she said bluntly. A nearby butler quickly stepped forward, clearly alarmed. "Lady Acela, that is inappropriate." But she ignored him entirely. Tilting her head, she looked at Taran again. "Although after a proper bath and decent clothing, you look more like a prince." The two introduced themselves shortly after. Taran calmly gave his name. She responded with her own. Acela. Though her smile remained playful, the atmosphere between them grew tense. She wasted no time getting to the point. "So," she asked directly, "which noble house do you belong to?" Taran answered without hesitation. "For personal reasons, I'd rather not say." Instead of becoming suspicious, Acela looked amused. Her smile sharpened slightly. In her mind, the situation was obvious. Someone with power like his must belong to a powerful family. The fact that he avoided the question only made her more curious. A mischievous spark appeared in her eyes. "Let's see what you're hiding," she thought. Without any warning, she released her power. A blazing wave of orange and golden mana erupted from her body, filling the room with intense pressure. The air trembled under the sudden surge of energy. Taran's gaze sharpened immediately. The force pressing against him was immense. Standing within the storm of her aura, Acela smiled confidently. "Show me," she challenged. She knew exactly what she was doing. If Taran wanted to resist the pressure, he would have no choice but to reveal his own strength. Surrounded by the burning glow of her mana, Taran remained still. The pressure weighed heavily on him. A single drop of sweat slid slowly down his temple. He had been cornered. In the next moment, he responded. Mana surged from his body in a powerful wave. A deep crimson energy burst outward, colliding directly with Acela's golden aura. Instantly, the room filled with overwhelming power as the two forces clashed violently. The air grew thick and heavy, vibrating under the intensity of their mana. One of the guards quickly stepped in front of the frightened maids, shielding them from the spreading pressure. Even so, the energy continued to surge through the chamber. After several tense moments, Taran finally withdrew his power. Acela did the same. By then, she had already felt everything she needed to know. Instead of looking threatened, she seemed strangely delighted. She stared down at her hands for a moment, almost fascinated, as if confirming something she had suspected. Then she looked back at Taran with a playful smile. "Hey," she said casually, "why don't you marry me?" The sudden proposal left Taran completely stunned. His mind went blank. He simply stared at her, unable to process what he had just heard. Seeing his frozen reaction, Acela tilted her head. "What's with that face?" she said lightly. "Relax, it was just a joke." She paused briefly before adding with a teasing grin. "But, you should think about it." She turned toward the door. "The seat beside me is currently empty." With that mysterious remark, she walked out of the room, her guard following close behind. Even after she was gone, the atmosphere she had created lingered in the chamber. Taran remained standing in place, still confused by everything that had just happened. Slowly, he looked down at his hand. He could still feel the faint tremor left behind by the clash of their powers. A trace of uncertainty entered Taran's thoughts. He frowned slightly and murmured to himself, trying to make sense of what he had just experienced. Her mana, it's at least equal to mine. The realization unsettled him. Is this kind of power normal in this place? The scene shifted to another chamber within the mansion. A man sat calmly in the center of the room, his posture dignified and composed. He was introduced as the ruler of Aurum, Rugvaltus. When Taran entered, the nobleman greeted him with quiet authority. "Welcome, young noble," he said evenly. You already know who I am. Taran inclined his head respectfully before replying. My name is Taran. Taran, Rugvaltus repeated thoughtfully, as if weighing the name. After a brief pause, he continued. I hear you wish to use the library. His gaze remained steady as he spoke. Many people come here after hearing rumors about it, he added. So allow me to clarify something beforehand. His tone grew firm. There is no legendary magic hidden there. Nor will you find some secret technique capable of drastically increasing your mana. Taran listened attentively. Then he answered without hesitation. That's fine with me. I never expected anything like that in the first place. Rugvaltus studied him silently for a moment, seemingly evaluating the sincerity of his words. Eventually, the Lord nodded. If that is truly your intention, I have no reason to refuse, he said calmly. There is nothing within that library that concerns confidential matters of my house. He leaned back slightly in his chair. However, it's already late today. Rest for now and return tomorrow. Is that acceptable? Taran bowed his head lightly. I'm grateful for your generosity, he said sincerely. I won't forget it. The following day arrived. Taran made his way toward the Grand Magic Library Tower. The massive structure rose high into the sky, its towering height dominating the surrounding landscape. As he approached the entrance, the guard stationed there straightened immediately. After confirming his credentials, they bowed respectfully. Your entry permission has been verified, one of them announced. Welcome, honored guest, to the Sky Library. Taran pushed open the large doors and stepped inside. The moment he saw the interior, he stopped in his tracks. Rows upon rows of bookshelves filled the vast chamber, stretching upward in a magnificent circular formation. The towering shelves spiraled higher and higher, forming a structure that seemed almost endless. The air carried the faint scent of aged parchment and ink, giving the entire place an ancient and dignified atmosphere. Taran had never seen anything like it before. His voice escaped in quiet amazement. So, this is the library. Nice to meet you, Taran. A voice suddenly spoke from nearby. He turned. A young girl stood a short distance away, looking directly at him. Without hesitation, she introduced herself. I'm the librarian, she said calmly. The Lord personally assigned me to manage this place. She folded her arms behind her back. By his order, I'll explain the rules you must follow while using the library. Taran stared at her for a moment, surprised. A child is the librarian? He thought. The girl raised one finger and began listing the rules. First rule, if you damage anything, you will compensate for it. She lifted another finger. Second rule, no taking books out of the library. Then she added casually, and while you're here, I'll be watching you the whole time. Taran nodded slowly. I understand. However, after a brief pause, he spoke again. But, when I'm reading, could you stand a little farther away? It feels a bit uncomfortable. Then curiosity got the better of him. If you're the librarian, he asked, does that mean you've read all the books here? Of course, she answered confidently. If you need help finding something, just ask me. I'm the best at it. Tilting her head slightly, she suddenly asked with a mischievous grin. So, what kind of books are you looking for? Romance? History? She paused before adding bluntly. Or since you're still young, something a bit more adult? Taran was caught completely off guard by the unexpected question. For a brief moment, he simply blinked in surprise. But he quickly regained his composure. I want books about the world, he said. General knowledge. This time, it was the librarian who looked surprised. Nevertheless, she reacted instantly. Moving with surprising speed, she gathered several books from nearby shelves and stacked them neatly in front of him. The young librarian placed the stack of books in front of Taran and spoke casually. Most of the books here were written hundreds of years ago, she explained. So they won't be very helpful for current events. But this section should still give you a basic understanding of things. Taran nodded gratefully. Thank you. You're welcome, she replied with a light shrug. After that, Taran lifted one of the books from the pile. He stared at the cover for a moment, almost thoughtfully. So, this is a book, he murmured quietly, as though rediscovering something simple yet important. Slowly, he opened it and began to read. As his eyes moved across the pages, a faint spark of wonder appeared in his expression. Incredible. From that day onward, Taran followed the same routine without fail. Every day, he returned to the library and spent countless hours buried in its ancient texts. Surrounded by endless shelves and centuries of preserved knowledge, he immersed himself completely in study. Little by little, the unfamiliar world around him began to make sense. He learned about the geography of the continent, the many races that inhabited it, and the customs that governed the behavior of wizards and nobles alike. The books also described the crafting and processing of various magical materials and artifacts. There were records of dangerous monsters lurking in distant territories, along with relics said to originate from the era of the ancient empire. With every page he read, the once mysterious world slowly gained clarity. What had once felt like a vast, unknowable void gradually formed into a clear and structured understanding inside his mind. One day, Terran stood once again before the Lord of Aurum. Rugvaltus regarded him calmly. "I hear you've been making good use of the library," he said. "Yes," Terran replied respectfully. The Lord nodded slightly before continuing. "You should understand something clearly. Allowing you access to the library was a gesture of goodwill, separate from how we treat visiting nobles." His tone remained composed but deliberate. "And now," he added, "I would like to ask for something in return for that goodwill." Terran did not hesitate. "Please tell me what you require." Rugvaltus leaned forward slightly. "A monster has appeared north of Aurum. It has been attacking travelers along the road." Terran met his gaze. "You want me to hunt it?" The Lord's expression hardened. "The knights who were sent to subdue it never returned," he said quietly. "They were devoured." The room fell silent for a moment. "It appears that someone of noble rank will have to deal with it personally," Rugvaltus continued. "Unfortunately, our household currently lacks the manpower to mobilize many forces." Terran considered this briefly before answering calmly. "Very well." Deep down, he felt no hesitation. Protecting people is what a wizard should do, he thought. Still, something about the situation struck him as unusual. Most wizards avoid getting involved in matters like this. Perhaps noticing his curiosity, Rugvaltus offered further explanation. "The northern road that the creature has blocked is an important trade route for Aurum," he said. "It has been closed for 10 days now. We must reopen it as soon as possible." Terran thought silently. 10 days. That was before he had even arrived in Aurum. "So that's why he allowed me to use the library so easily," he realized. Soon afterward, a group set out from the city. Several individuals traveled together in a well-organized procession, heading north toward the danger. At the front of the group walked a familiar figure, Acela. She spoke casually while leading the way. "Father really is something," she remarked. "Imagine sending a guest to hunt a monster." Her tone carried a hint of teasing criticism. "Are we really that unreliable?" Then she waved a hand dismissively. "Don't get me wrong. I'm not blaming anyone. I'm just saying my father tends to make a big fuss." The man walking beside her gave an awkward laugh. "Calling the Lord a troublemaker might be a little excessive, don't you think, young lady?" Acela shot him an unimpressed glance. "Just drop it." The same man then turned toward Terran with a more formal expression. "This is actually our first proper meeting," he said politely. "My name is Marvin Visas. I look forward to working with you." "Likewise," Terran replied calmly. With introductions finished, the group continued moving along the northern road. From the front, Acela spoke again. "Let's finish this quickly and head back." While they walked, Marvin leaned slightly toward Terran and whispered quietly, "By any chance, are you interested in my older sister?" Terran immediately shook his head. "No." Marvin visibly relaxed. "That's good to hear," he muttered with clear relief. At that moment, the men walking ahead suddenly raised their hands. "Stop!" The group halted. Ahead of them lay the wreckage of a shattered carriage. Broken pieces of wood and scattered cargo covered the road, clear evidence of a violent attack. One of the men examined the scene and spoke quietly. "Was this the creature's doing?" "Most likely," another replied. "We forbade travel north from our side, so they must have come from the south and encountered it." Terran remained silent as he studied the area carefully. His eyes moved across the ground, observing every detail left behind. Then he spoke. "It's a monkey." Everyone turned toward him. "A monkey?" Acela repeated skeptically. Terran crouched down slightly and pointed toward a large mark pressed into the soil. "Look here," he said. "This is a palm print." He continued examining the surrounding tracks. "It attacked the merchants and then retreated back into the forest. If we follow the trail, we should be able to find it." Acela frowned thoughtfully. "Follow it? I can't use that kind of magic very well." She turned to Marvin. "What about you?" He shook his head. "I can't either. Though there is a knight who—" Before he could finish, Terran stepped forward. "I'll try tracking it." Acela looked at him with curiosity. "Oh, are you from that lineage?" Terran answered calmly. "I use this technique often, so I'm familiar with it." With that, he closed his eyes briefly and focused. Drawing in a slow breath, he concentrated on the faint traces lingering in the air. Gradually, the scent of the creature began to reveal itself to his senses. Subtle, almost invisible trails that guided him forward like a path only he could perceive. After tracking the trail for a short while, Aaron suddenly stopped. His gaze shifted sharply to the side, and he raised a hand to point. "Over there." The group immediately changed direction and followed where he led. After a brief walk, they arrived near the edge of a riverbank. Taran halted again, carefully examining the ground and the surrounding area. After a moment of quiet observation, he spoke. "The trail ends here." He narrowed his eyes slightly. "It seems the creature washed itself in the river." Acela looked at him with visible disbelief. "Are you saying a monster actually did that just to avoid being tracked?" Taran considered the possibility before answering. "It may have done it intentionally." Just then, something caught his attention. The same scent he had been following suddenly became stronger, much stronger, and far closer. Taran's eyes widened slightly. He turned instantly and raised his voice in warning. "Behind you!" Everyone spun around at once. Standing only a short distance away was a massive creature resembling an enormous monkey. Its towering body was far larger and more powerful than anyone had expected. The beast let out a thunderous roar that shook the air around them. Clutched in its huge hands were several massive stones. The knights and soldiers reacted immediately, shouting warnings as they tried to prepare for battle. But the monster was faster. Before the formation could even be organized, it launched its attack. Chaos erupted. The creature hurled the enormous stones with brutal force. They crashed into the soldiers, sending bodies flying and crushing others beneath their weight. The impact was devastating. Within moments, the group was thrown into complete disarray. Several soldiers fell instantly, while others were badly wounded. Taran narrowly avoided one of the incoming stones, leaping aside just in time. As he steadied himself, his gaze swept across the battlefield. Bodies were already scattered across the ground. Nearby, Acela desperately used the fallen bodies of 2 soldiers as cover, shielding herself from the incoming barrage. From behind them, she shouted desperately, "Attack!" In Taran's mind, a quiet thought surfaced. Mother was wrong. The surviving soldiers attempted to rush forward and strike back, but suddenly the monster changed its behavior. Instead of continuing its assault, it turned its massive body as if preparing to retreat. At that exact moment, Taran moved. He drew his weapon in one smooth motion. Without hesitation, he delivered a single strike. The attack unleashed a tremendous surge of power. A brilliant blue energy burst forward like a concentrated wave, slicing through the air with incredible speed and precision. The force of it stunned everyone present. In a single instant, the enormous monster was completely annihilated. Silence spread across the battlefield. The surviving soldiers stood frozen, unable to believe what they had just witnessed. Slowly, their gazes shifted toward the one responsible. Taran walked forward calmly, his weapon still in his hand. He twirled it lightly as the last traces of energy faded into the air. A faint blue aura continued to ripple around him. With that single, decisive strike, the battle was already over. Aella and her brother slowly turned their attention toward the battlefield below, where the monstrous creature had already collapsed. Its massive body lay motionless, dust still rising around it from the impact. Aella's expression hardened, her gaze turning cold as she looked down at it. "Die," she said quietly. The moment the word left her lips, a surge of blazing energy erupted from her body. From within that fire, a massive serpent took form, a roaring python made entirely of flames. It shot forward with terrifying speed, cutting through the air as it rushed toward the fallen, monkey-like beast. In the blink of an eye, the fiery serpent closed the distance. Then, a violent explosion shook the entire area. The blast echoed through the surroundings, flames and smoke erupting outward as the creature was completely consumed. The ground trembled under the force, leaving behind nothing but scorched remains. Not far away, Taran watched the scene unfold with a sharp, observant gaze. As the flames faded, a thought crossed his mind. So that was the bloodline power of House Volta's pyromaniacs. Around them, the soldiers who had been bracing themselves for the worst finally exhaled in relief. The tension that had gripped them moments ago began to loosen. "It's over," one of them muttered tiredly. Aella turned her attention away from the destruction and looked toward Taran. A faint shiver ran through her as she spoke. "Wow, for a second there, I actually got chills when that rock came flying at us." Her brother immediately smirked, clearly amused. "What? You were scared?" She snapped back without missing a beat. "Shut up. You were the one screaming like a little girl." "What? When did I ever do that?" he shot back, clearly offended. While the siblings bickered, the soldiers nearby were dealing with the aftermath. The battlefield was chaotic. Injured men groaning, others rushing to help. "I think my arm's broken," one soldier groaned in pain. "Stop complaining," another replied bluntly. "Someone over there lost their whole arm." "Does anyone have spare bandages?" a voice called out urgently. "This one's still bleeding from the head." "What should we do?" another shouted in panic. "Try using this medicine," someone suggested quickly. Amidst the confusion and noise, Taran stood quietly, taking everything in. His eyes moved across the scene. The wounded soldiers, the frantic movements, the disorganized recovery. What a mess, he muttered under his breath. After a brief pause, he assessed the situation more carefully. A faint sense of relief settled in. At least there were no deaths. Still, his expression gradually turned serious as he reflected on the battle. Yes, it was a surprise attack, he thought calmly. But even so, this level of injury shouldn't have happened. His gaze lingered on the wounded. People with mana-enhanced bodies were naturally far stronger than ordinary knights. Their durability alone should have prevented such severe outcomes. Yet during the fight, he had clearly seen something else. Those stronger had not hesitated to push the weaker forward. They had used them as shields. The realization left a bitter taste in his mind. Before he could think further, someone suddenly spoke to him. What's wrong? Taran blinked slightly, then shook his head. Nothing. Ayala clapped her hands lightly, shifting the mood. More importantly, come on. Let's absorb the mana. The third member of their group nodded. All right. Soon, the three of them gathered around the remains of the defeated monster. Faint traces of mana still lingered in its body, slowly dispersing into the air. Taran closed his eyes and focused. As the energy flowed toward him, he observed the process carefully. Just like the book described, even when multiple people absorb it, the efficiency doesn't seem to drop. The energy settled into his body smoothly. Beside him, Ayala suddenly let out an annoyed sigh. Ugh, I can't absorb any more. This stupid growth limit. Her brother chuckled. Same here. I've hit my limit too. He glanced at Taran thoughtfully. Now I get why father sent him with us. His spell control is on par with mine, and his mana capacity is just as high. And he hasn't even reached his limit yet. Time passed, and eventually the group began making their way back from the battlefield. As they walked, the third member spoke up as if something had just occurred to him. Now that I think about it, if it weren't for you, we wouldn't have beaten that monster. He looked at Taran with genuine respect. From tracking it to landing the decisive blow, you made it possible. Taran shook his head modestly. It wasn't anything special. If anything, I regret noticing it too late and letting it strike first. I didn't expect it to have a detection ability. It had one? The other asked in surprise. Taran nodded. Most likely. Abilities tend to develop based on physical traits. That creature had oversized hands and unusually large eyes. It probably evolved throwing strength and long-range vision, maybe even the ability to see through obstacles like the forest. The explanation left the others impressed. Seriously, you figured all that out so quickly? Ayala's brother asked. Taran answered calmly. I read about similar cases in a monster encyclopedia at the library. The library? He repeated, clearly baffled. That boring place? Who even goes there? Ayala nodded in agreement. I went once out of curiosity, but the books were too complicated. I didn't even finish one. Taran gave a simple suggestion. Next time, ask the librarian for easier books. The librarian? Ayala tilted her head. There's actually someone there? Yes, Taran replied matter-of-factly. The one who manages it. Her confusion only deepened. Later, the scene shifted to the quiet interior of the library. As Taran entered, a cheerful voice greeted him. Welcome back, Taran. He paused. The casual use of his name immediately caught his attention. His expression stiffened slightly as realization dawned. That's strange. No one here should address a noble like that. He studied the woman more closely. And she doesn't look like an ordinary librarian either. How do you know my name? He asked directly. Instead of answering, the woman simply smiled. She walked over to the desk behind her and sat down casually. You're only noticing that now? She replied playfully. Taran narrowed his eyes slightly. As I thought. The woman continued, her tone light. I saw it on your permit. Within this library, I can see everything. As she spoke, the book in her hand suddenly lifted on its own and drifted back onto a shelf, guided by an invisible force. Taran watched the phenomenon carefully before speaking again. Then, how should I address you? She shrugged. I don't really have a name. Call me whatever you like. Maybe something cute, like, my love. Taran responded instantly, his tone completely flat. I'll just call you librarian. She smiled teasingly. You're so stiff. Stepping closer, she added with a playful edge, it's funny how polite you suddenly are, after using me for days and ordering me around. Taran frowned slightly. Don't stand so close. It's uncomfortable. After a brief pause, his gaze sharpened. Are you a mage from the old empire? She shook her head gently. No, she said. As she spoke, several books began to float around her, circling slowly as her body lifted into the air. I was never human to begin with. Her smile remained calm. You could say I'm something like a spirit, and that description suits me just fine. The librarian continued speaking in a calm, almost casual tone, as if the nature of her existence were something simple to explain. When a soul resides within something alive, it becomes a living spirit, she said. But when it inhabits something that is neither living nor dead, it becomes something like me. She gestured lightly around the room. In other words, this entire library is my body. The form you're seeing now only exists to make communication easier. A faint smile touched her lips as she added, it all depends on the preferences of the one interacting with me. Though your preferences are a bit. Before she could finish, Taran cut her off with an awkward expression. Don't make things up, he said firmly. The librarian let out a soft laugh, clearly amused. I'm not making anything up, she replied. Think of me like a reflection on water. To test her words, Taran reached out his hand. But instead of making contact, his fingers passed straight through her body as if she were nothing more than air. The moment he realized what he had done, the librarian's expression shifted. She looked visibly irritated. Taran quickly withdrew his hand. Sorry, he said, recognizing his mistake. Still annoyed, she crossed her arms. Do you have any idea how frustrating it is? I can't directly use my power on intruders. If I could, I would have punished every single person who mishandled the books in this place. Taran fell into thought for a moment before speaking. It sounds like House Voltas doesn't even know you exist, he said slowly. Actually, it might be the same for everyone who's ever used this library. The librarian's expression softened into a knowing smile. That's because, until now, no one qualified to perceive me, she answered calmly. She continued her explanation, her voice steady. My creator designed it that way. Only those whose type has reached a certain level of completion can see me. Her gaze settled on Taran, and her smile turned slightly playful. So, that means you're the only one who can see me. Kind of romantic, don't you think? Taran frowned faintly. What do you mean by type? It's what mages usually call a bloodline, she explained simply. Hearing that, Taran's curiosity deepened. Then can you tell me about mine? He asked. She gave a small shrug. That's something you should normally ask your parents. I'm an orphan, he replied calmly. The librarian paused for a brief moment, as if reconsidering. I see, she murmured. In that case, I can check it for you. I just need your permission to examine your body. Taran hesitated, a hint of unease appearing on his face. Examine my body, he repeated awkwardly. Is that really necessary? The librarian only smiled. Without waiting any longer, she reached forward, and her hands passed directly into his body as if nothing were there. Wow, she said lightly. We're connected. Taran immediately stiffened. Don't say things like that, he replied, clearly uncomfortable. But as he focused on the sensation, he noticed something unexpected. It didn't hurt at all. After a moment, the librarian withdrew her hands and began explaining. There are a few minor fragments, she said thoughtfully, but the dominant traits are the pursuer and hunter bloodlines. Taran reacted quickly. Is that related to House Sahar? She nodded. Yes. Then she added, but there's something else as well. It's mixed. Mixed? Taran asked. It means your bloodline comes from two different origins, she explained. Then what's the other one? He pressed. She shook her head slightly. I can't tell. It's still sealed. Seeing his confusion, she elaborated. A sealed bloodline isn't uncommon when different lineages combine. As you grow stronger, it will naturally reveal itself. Taran nodded slowly. I understand. As he fell silent, a memory surfaced in his mind. His mother. She had always carried herself with a grace that didn't match that of a commoner. The more he thought about it, the more it seemed likely that she had noble origins, perhaps from a lineage so diluted that its power had nearly vanished. After a moment, Taran lowered his head slightly and bowed. Thank you, he said. The librarian's lips curved into a mischievous smile. If you're really grateful, she replied playfully, then stay here for another month. From that point on, things began to change for Taran. Now that he understood the true nature of the library and its guardian, he no longer spent his time silently reading. Instead, he actively questioned everything, asking for explanations whenever he encountered something unclear. Inside the quiet hall, he once asked with visible curiosity, so there are really that many invisible substances? The librarian confirmed it without hesitation. Yes, she said. If you suspend water in the air and shape it properly, you can use it to observe them directly. Her knowledge extended far beyond the books that remained on the shelves. Even texts that had been lost or stolen over centuries were still within her awareness. For Taran, This was invaluable. Through her guidance, he began to understand the fundamental laws governing the world. She explained how unseen microorganisms caused disease, how decay occurred through tiny life forms feeding on organic matter, and how natural forces shaped everyday phenomena. He learned about the bending of light, the generation of heat through friction, and the processes behind injury and recovery. The library was no longer just a place filled with books. It had become a place where his understanding of reality itself expanded. Eventually, Taran decided to put that knowledge into practice. Standing before a fresh apple, he focused his magic. "Let's begin with decomposition," he said quietly. Using both his mana and the principles he had learned, he accelerated the natural process. Before his eyes, the apple rapidly decayed, its surface darkening and collapsing in on itself. The librarian watched with interest. "Well?" she asked. Taran studied the result, clearly impressed. "It's remarkable," he admitted. "Magic alone could achieve something similar, but understanding the process reduces the mana consumption significantly." This realization struck him deeply. By understanding the underlying principles of nature, he could achieve the same results far more efficiently. After a moment of thought, he turned to her. "Perhaps powerful families are deliberately hoarding this kind of knowledge," he said. "If everyone understood these concepts, their advantage would disappear." The librarian nodded slowly. "That would explain why knowledge seems to decline over time," she replied. Silence settled briefly between them. Then Taran spoke again. "I think it's time for me to leave." The librarian's expression shifted in surprise. "You're leaving?" He nodded. "Yes. The owner of this place has made it clear that I shouldn't stay any longer." At once, her demeanor changed dramatically. "No!" she cried, dropping toward the floor in exaggerated despair. "Take me with you." Taran looked at her curiously. "Can you even leave?" She answered honestly. "No." Then, with sudden hope, she added, "So why don't you just stay here instead? I'll take good care of you." Taran shook his head. "I'll pass." Realizing he was serious, the librarian slowly floated back toward the shelves. Her gaze drifted across the countless books surrounding them. "This land holds many remnants of divine knowledge," she said quietly. "You should return from time to time. There might be other spirits who know even more." As Taran walked toward the exit, he paused briefly and glanced back. "I'll visit again," he said. "Come if you want, or don't," she replied casually. He allowed himself a faint smile. "There are still too many books here that I haven't read." With that, he left the library behind. As he continued his journey, his thoughts turned toward his next destination. According to the map he had obtained, the territory of House Zahir, the Emerald Desert, lay to the east of Orem. With a clear goal in mind, Taran moved forward without hesitation. Taran moved away from the library grounds, his steps steady though his mind remained occupied. The map he had studied was clear. The Emerald Desert, homeland of the House Zahar, lay far to the east of Orem. That was where he would search for answers about his parents. With that quiet resolve settled deep within him, he continued forward. As the day stretched on, the sun dipped low, staining the sky in hues of orange and crimson. Eventually, Tron paused at a quiet clearing. There was no urgency in his expression, only calm reasoning. If the clues he sought had survived this long, they would not vanish simply because he arrived a little later. By the next day, he was back on the road. The path ahead grew grim. Bodies lay scattered across the ground, silent witnesses to a recent conflict. Tron's gaze lingered only briefly before he moved on, undisturbed. His thoughts remained steady. If the truth still existed, it would wait. Then, a sound broke the silence. A horse. Reacting instantly, Tron slipped behind a nearby bush and observed. Ahead, an injured man lay motionless while a horse stood guard over him. Without warning, the animal charged forward, attacking figures positioned opposite it. Tron narrowed his eyes. The presence of a saddle told him everything. This was no wild encounter. The horse was protecting its master. His focus shifted toward the attackers. Two figures stood there, their presence unsettling. Their appearance confirmed his suspicion. They were dark elves. One of them cursed under his breath, frustrated by the horse's resistance, while the other urged him to find an opening. As their irritation grew, they began channeling a dark, unnatural energy. What followed made Tron's expression harden. The corpses scattered across the ground began to twitch, then rise. He recognized it immediately: necromancy. For a brief moment, Tron hesitated. There was always the possibility that the fallen man had provoked them first. But that uncertainty vanished almost instantly. One of the dark elves crouched beside a corpse, casually tearing into it as if it were nothing more than food. Their conversation confirmed it. They were cannibals. That was enough. Without another thought, Tron activated his concealment ability. His presence vanished, erased from detection. The next moment, he struck. An unseen force tore through the air, obliterating one of the dark elves before he could react. The remaining one froze in shock, unable to comprehend what had just happened. There had been no warning, only death. But the confusion didn't last. Snarling, he barked an order. At once, the reanimated beasts gathered around him, forming a defensive perimeter. Another invisible strike followed, but this time one of the creatures intercepted it, sacrificing itself. Realization dawned on him. Someone was hiding. With a grim expression, the dark elf summoned another creature, one that released a strange, spreading energy. As it pulsed outward, the concealment around Tron began to falter. His figure flickered, then became visible. The dark elf's eyes locked onto him instantly, rage twisting his features. Found you. With a furious command, he sent every beast charging at once. The monsters surged forward from all directions. Tron didn't hesitate. Flames gathered in his hand, growing brighter and more intense with each passing second before he unleashed them forward. But from the front, two beasts, a massive bull-like creature and a swift fox-like predator, lunged at him simultaneously. He barely avoided the attack. Even as he regained his footing, pain shot through him. The fox had already sunk its teeth into his leg. With force, he threw it aside, creating a brief opening. But there was no time to recover. The bull was already charging again, its massive body barreling toward him with unstoppable momentum. The impact came like a storm. Tron was sent flying, crashing violently into a tree. The force of the collision left his body trembling, his strength shaken. From a distance, the dark elf laughed cruelly. His voice dripped with malice as he shouted, mocking the fallen warrior, promising that before death came, Tron would beg for it. In the midst of the chaos, just as Tron struggled to endure the relentless assault, the horse reappeared like a sudden storm. Without hesitation, it charged straight toward the remaining dark elves. Its hooves struck with brutal force, slamming the dark elf to the ground before he could react. Caught completely off guard, the dark elf's composure shattered. Panic crept into his voice as he shouted desperately for help. At his command, the summoned creatures immediately abandoned their attack on Tron. One after another, they turned back, rushing toward their master to shield him. Watching this, fury twisted the dark elf's face. Humiliation burned deep within him as he roared, vowing to kill the one who dared disgrace him. But before he could act, another strike descended. This time, it carried a crushing force, laced with the weight of stone. The blow landed decisively, ending his life in an instant. With his death, the unnatural energy sustaining the summoned beasts vanished. One by one, the creatures collapsed and dissolved, leaving behind a heavy, unnatural silence. Tron, who had been barely holding himself together, tried to rise. Pain shot through his entire body. Every movement felt heavier than the last. His breath came out uneven as his strength faded. For a moment he muttered weakly under his breath, convinced he might not survive. The horse approached him slowly. As Tron reached out and gently placed a hand against it, gratitude flickered faintly in his exhausted expression. Even in that state, he managed to thank it. Night soon fell. The battlefield had quieted, replaced by a calm stillness. Under the dim light, Tron sat across from a young man who had just regained consciousness. At first, the man looked startled, his gaze filled with confusion and caution. But Tron spoke calmly, breaking the tension. "You're awake." The young man, with striking yellow hair, looked at him carefully before asking who he was. Tron answered simply. He had found him under attack and intervened. Hearing this, the man's attention shifted to the horse beside him. His expression softened as he gently patted its neck, calling it Tilly. Watching the interaction, Tron remarked on the animal's intelligence, how it not only protected its owner but also knew when to retreat to safety. The young man nodded gratefully before introducing himself as Aziz of the Burke family. Tron gave his own name in return. After a brief pause, he asked about the reason behind the attack. Aziz lowered his gaze. There was no complex explanation, no provocation. He and his group had simply been traveling when they were suddenly ambushed. His voice trembled as he spoke, struggling to process what had happened. Then, the weight of loss broke through. Tears welled up as he apologized, unable to hold back his grief. The people he had lost were not merely servants, they were the ones who had raised him. Tron watched silently. There was no deception in that sorrow. It was genuine, raw. In that moment, he understood, Aziz was not pretending. After letting the silence settle, Tron asked how many enemies had been involved. Aziz believed that was all of them. Tron gave a slight nod before activating his sensory ability. His awareness expanded outward, scanning the surroundings carefully. After confirming there were no remaining threats, he quietly concluded that the area was safe. Another moment passed before Aziz spoke again, more composed this time. He asked if Tron had urgent matters to attend to. Tron simply replied that he was also traveling. That answer seemed to surprise Aziz. He studied Tron more closely, curiosity evident in his eyes. Someone with such ability, yet traveling alone, it didn't add up. Tron avoided giving a clear explanation. He downplayed his strength, stating that he had struggled in the fight and only survived thanks to the horse. Yet, as those words lingered, something subtle shifted. A faint blue aura began to seep from Tron's body, while at the same time, a red energy rose from Aziz. The two forces met quietly between them, creating an invisible tension neither could ignore. Tron's gaze sharpened slightly. Aziz was stronger than he appeared, yet not strong enough to survive such an encounter alone. The contradiction stirred questions in his mind. Instinct, or something deeper, like a hidden bloodline? Breaking the silence, Aziz spoke again. His tone carried sincerity as he extended an invitation. If Tron had no fixed destination, he could accompany him to the Burke family. It was both a gesture of gratitude and a way to repay the debt of saving his life. Tron's expression remained calm as he questioned what kind of repayment he meant. Aziz smiled. The Burke family, he explained, served the great House Arabian of the North. Their lineage specialized in enchantment craftsmanship, a tradition passed down through generations. As repayment, they would forge a magical artifact tailored specifically for Tron. Hearing this, Tron remained silent. He did not respond immediately. Instead, he sat there quietly, weighing the offer with careful thought, his mind already considering what accepting such a proposal might truly mean. The scene opened deep within the forest. Soft light filtered through the tall trees as Tron and Aziz moved forward, heading toward their destination. After walking for some time, Aziz let out a quiet breath. "Looks like it's finally over," he said. His voice carried a hint of relief, yet something heavier lingered beneath it. "In my heart, I wanted to send everyone back to their homeland, but that probably wouldn't have been possible, right?" He turned toward Tehran and looked at him. "Thank you for your help, Tehran." Tehran glanced at him, slightly puzzled. "For what exactly?" Aziz hesitated before answering. "For not getting angry at me, and other things." His expression tightened as he spoke again, a nervous tone slipping into his voice. "A noble crying over the sacrifice of his subordinates. It must look pathetic." Tehran's brows drew together. He could not understand why Aziz would think that way. And why would that be pathetic? Aziz paused, then replied quietly, "Because that's what I was taught by my father since I was young." He looked ahead as he continued. "Those who die on the battlefield are said to reside in a celestial place. Mourning them is considered weakness, and a true noble should know how to move forward past sacrifice." For a moment, his voice faltered. "But if strength means not grieving the death of family, then I guess I will never be strong." Tehran listened to him in silence. Then a warm smile appeared on his face. "That's not weakness," he said calmly. "That's your kindness." Aziz blinked, slightly taken aback. Then he spoke again, trying to lighten the mood. "By the way, since we've decided to travel together, how about we talk more casually from now on? We're not that far apart in age anyway." Tehran gave a small nod. "If you say so." Aziz smiled and raised his hand toward him. "Then I'm counting on you from now on, friend." For a brief moment, Tehran stood still, surprised. His gaze shifted to Aziz's outstretched hand as he quietly repeated, "Friend." Then he reached out, grasped his hand, and shook it firmly. "I'm counting on you too, my friend." After that, Aziz stretched lightly and said, "Let's take a short break." They stopped at a nearby spot and rested for a while. Tehran placed a box on the ground and looked at it with curiosity. "What is that?" Aziz smiled and replied, "It's a refrigerator box." He opened it, revealing neatly packed food, fresh fruits, and even wine inside. Everything looked perfectly preserved. "I packed plenty of food back in the last city," Aziz explained. Tehran's eyes widened in surprise. "The inside stays cold all the time." "Yeah," Aziz said. "Thanks to that, the food lasts without any issue. If it gets too cold, you can just heat it up." He then took out another item and showed it to Tehran. "This one releases water when you press the button." Next, he brought out a second item. "And this creates a shelter when you gather wood." Finally, he held up a third item. "This one sounds an alarm if someone approaches." Tehran observed everything closely, realizing just how prepared Aziz was for the journey ahead. Aziz suddenly looked excited as he spoke again. "What I'm wearing right now, this outfit is actually a magic item with a self-cleaning function." Tehran's eyes widened slightly. He examined the clothes more carefully, surprised. Magic items were supposed to be rare, yet Aziz was treating them so casually. The thought alone felt unbelievable. Just this outfit alone would be enough to repay my life, Tehran said honestly. Aziz smiled and shook his head. Something like this isn't worth as much as a life. His smile grew wider as he continued. I promise I'll reward you with something much better when we return to my home. And even if the elders don't allow it, I'll make it happen myself. Then he added confidently. Besides, it's nothing compared to what you can do. Tehran looked at him, slightly confused by those words. Aziz raised 2 fingers and began counting, his tone filled with amazement. I can't even remember how many types of magic I've seen you use during our journey. Animal manipulation, freezing, levitation, controlling liquids, enchantment, light enhancement, light emission, restriction, instant death, terrain manipulation, even lightning strikes. He stared at Tehran with curiosity. Have you spent your entire life practicing magic? Or do you have some kind of bloodline ability? Something that lets you learn any magic you want? At that moment, Tehran narrowed his eyes and looked at him quietly. Aziz quickly waved his hand, speaking in a slightly nervous tone. We agreed not to pry into each other's family background, right? I was just joking. There's no way such an absurd bloodline ability could exist. He paused, then asked casually. By the way, how old are you? Your face doesn't look like you've even reached 30 yet. Don't tell me you're actually 80. Tehran answered calmly. I've got about a month left until I turn 19. Aziz froze for a moment, completely shocked. I turned 43 this year, he muttered. Then he let out a small laugh. Well, a difference of 24 years. I guess that's not such a big deal for us. He shook his head, still amazed. I should have realized when you said you defeated 2 necromancers with that level of magic power. Who would have thought there were 2 geniuses like that in this world? Tehran caught onto his words and frowned slightly. 2? Aziz spoke casually, as if it wasn't anything unusual. Yeah, not quite your level, or maybe close. After all, that person's bloodline is something else. He crossed his arms lightly before continuing. Anyway, I know another genius around your age. She's my second cousin. Tehran looked at him with interest. Can you ask that person to make a magic item for me? Aziz shook his head. No, she's not from my direct bloodline. She belongs to the main family. Hearing that, Tehran's gaze sharpened slightly. If it's the main family, then could it be? Aziz continued speaking, calmly explaining about his cousin and his family background. She's the princess of the Arabayan family, he said. And she's incredibly powerful. In the future, she might even become the head of the great lineage. He paused briefly before continuing, his tone turning more serious. Unlike ordinary mage families, a great lineage doesn't simply pass its leadership to the patriarch's own child. There are dozens of relatives in the same generation, and among them, someone stronger than the patriarch's child always emerges. Tehran listened quietly, taking in every detail. Even so, Aziz went on, among all the patriarch's children, she was born with the greatest talent. Her name is Maisa. There was a hint of admiration in his voice as he spoke. In just 10 years after awakening her magic, Maisa mastered the Ebryon bloodline magic, along with nearly every type of combat magic. Tehran's eyes narrowed slightly in surprise. And with all kinds of support, Aziz added, even though she's only 21 now, her magical power isn't much different from the core members of the family. Hearing that, Tehran was genuinely surprised. The level of talent Aziz described was far beyond ordinary standards. A true prodigy, he thought. Aziz's explanation made it clear. Maisa wasn't just talented. She stood at a level that could influence the future of an entire lineage. After a moment of silence, Tehran spoke, curiosity evident in his voice. With that level of power at her age, did your family give her any special support for the future? Aziz replied without hesitation. She even inherited our great-uncle's magic power when he passed away. Well, of course. The rest of us received our share too. Tehran's eyes narrowed slightly in surprise. So that's how it is. There was clearly a deeper reason why great lineages stood at the top. Before he could think further, Aziz suddenly raised a finger and pointed ahead. But it looks like we've finally arrived at our destination. Tehran followed his gaze. In front of them stretched vast fields of golden wheat, swaying gently with the wind. Beyond that lay a grand territory, the lands of Irving, ruled by the Varick family. At its heart stood their destination. Some time later, Aziz entered the mansion. The moment he stepped inside, a woman rushed toward him with concern in her eyes. Aziz, my son, what happened? Aziz ran forward and embraced her tightly. Mother. His voice trembled as he held her, unable to hold back his emotions. Tehran stood at a distance, watching the scene with a strange expression. A grown man, crying like that? The sight felt unexpected, almost absurd to him. At that moment, an elder approached with a stern look. "Mind your dignity. At the very least, address her properly as madam. Why are you showing such reckless behavior?" Turan glanced at the man but said nothing. To him, Aziz's reaction didn't seem wrong. Aziz quickly composed himself and bowed his head slightly. "My apologies." Then he turned toward Turan and spoke. "This is Turan, a friend I met in the south." His expression became serious. "He is my benefactor. He risked his life to save me when I was on the brink of death. If not for him, I wouldn't have made it back alive." His mother's face tightened with concern. "Your journey shouldn't have been this dangerous." "What exactly happened?" Aziz answered. "We were attacked by dark elf necromancers." Her expression instantly changed, filled with anger. "Dark elves? Those filthy creatures dared to touch my son?" Her voice rose sharply. "If they targeted you, I should personally lead an army and tear them apart." Before things escalated, the elder stepped forward calmly. "Please calm down, madam. People are watching." Then he turned his attention toward Turan. "May I ask, which family does our benefactor belong to?" Turan remained silent for a moment before replying. "That's hard to say." The elder frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" Turan answered honestly. "To be precise, I don't really know. I was born to a commoner mother, and I don't know who my father is." Aziz looked at him in shock. "You never told me that." Then he hesitated and added quietly, "Though I guess it's not exactly something to be proud of." His mother observed Turan for a moment before speaking in a composed tone. "I see. Your name is Turan, and you belong to no known family." Her expression remained calm, yet distant. "Since you saved the child who is the treasure of our house, we will provide you with an appropriate reward." She paused briefly before continuing. "However, it would be difficult to offer you a room in our mansion. Instead, I will arrange for you to stay in a nearby city." Aziz immediately frowned. "Mother, what are you saying? How can we not welcome the benefactor who saved my life into our home?" She replied coldly. "Under normal circumstances, it would be fine. But right now, we have an important guest staying with us." Her gaze returned to Turan. "No matter how much of a benefactor you are, we cannot allow someone of unknown identity inside." Then she added, "Please understand." Turan remained calm and nodded slightly. "It's fine. You don't need to go that far because of me." Just as the conversation seemed to settle, a voice suddenly echoed from nearby. "Aren't you being a bit harsh?" Everyone turned toward the source. A young girl stepped forward, her presence drawing attention immediately. Her voice was calm, yet carried a subtle authority. "I don't think someone who saved Aziz would suddenly try to assassinate me." All of a sudden, the atmosphere froze. Aziz's mother and the elder both turned their gaze toward the source of the voice. The moment they saw her, their expressions stiffened. The woman stood there, dressed entirely in dark attire. Her presence felt cold and sharp, carrying an air of danger that didn't match the image of a noble lady. Aziz's eyes widened in surprise. "Maisa, what are you doing here all of a sudden?" Turan quietly observed her. "So this is the princess of the Ebryon family." Her appearance felt more like that of a warrior than a noble. Maisa replied calmly, "It hasn't been long since I was nearly assassinated by those Zahir, so I came here to hide." Turan frowned slightly and stepped forward. "An assassination attempt? In the main house?" he asked, clearly surprised. "With such tight security, don't tell me they actually succeeded in getting that far." Maisa gave a faint nod. "Yes, there's probably a traitor inside. It's not like there are only one or two people in the family who dislike me." She didn't seem particularly shaken as she continued. "Anyway, I'm tired. I'll retire first. Good night." Without waiting for a response, she turned and left. For a moment, the entire hall remained silent. Then Aziz's mother spoke to a maid, her tone now noticeably different. "Prepare the second-best guest room for Lord Turan." Some time later, inside the guest room, Turan lay on the bed, finally able to relax. His eyes wandered across the room. Everything, from the furniture to the smallest decorations, reflected the wealth and status of the family. Even the mansion itself felt grand and overwhelming. After resting for a while, he stepped out into the hallway. As he walked, a voice suddenly called out to him. "You're up early. What are you doing alone in the hallway?" It was Aziz. Turan glanced at a nearby lamp and pointed toward it. That caught my attention. Aziz looked at it and replied casually, "Oh, that's a magic lamp. We usually make those when we practice enchantment magic as kids." He added with a slight smile, "There are plenty of them lying around in storage." Turan gave a small nod. "That's quite excessive." Just then, a deep rumble echoed from behind him. A sharp, golden flash of lightning split through the distance, followed by a powerful surge of energy that shook the air itself. Turan immediately turned around. Aziz looked in the same direction and said calmly, "That looks like Misa training. She's always like that, diligent as ever." Turan narrowed his eyes slightly. "That is Ebryon bloodline magic, right? Thunder-based power." Aziz nodded. "Yeah, it's one of the strongest." He let out a quiet breath. "I've never hated my bloodline, but even so, it still makes me a little jealous. She really does look like a goddess when she fights." Outside, bolts of lightning continued to strike, illuminating the surroundings with overwhelming force. Turan watched silently. "I'm curious, just how strong is the next generation heir?" Aziz suddenly turned to him. "Want to go take a look?" Turan smiled faintly. "I'm curious, but I don't think it's a good idea for someone like me to approach." Aziz shrugged. "So what if you're an outsider? I'll vouch for you." Then he added with a grin, "To be honest, I'm curious too. Between you and Misa, who's stronger?" Turan glanced at him. "So that's your real reason for bringing me here?" Aziz laughed lightly. "Honestly, a few years ago, I trained with Misa. It's been bothering me ever since. I want to see her frustrated at least once." Moments later, the scene shifted outside. Lightning continued to crack across the sky as Misa stood in the middle of the training ground. "Aziz." She turned as her name was called. Her gaze landed on him and then shifted toward the figure beside him. "And the one next to you, who is he?" Turan stepped forward slightly. "I am Turan, my lady." Misa studied him for a moment before nodding. "Turan, I see. So what brings you here all of a sudden?" Aziz spoke quickly. "Nothing much. We saw you training and wanted to join in. We've done this before, remember?" Misa's lips curved into a faint smirk. "I remember. Back then, you struggled for an entire week while I mastered it in 2 days." Her eyes sharpened slightly. "You ran off crying." Aziz's expression stiffened instantly. "Hey!" he shouted, clearly annoyed. At that moment, Turan let out a faint, mocking smile. Ignoring Aziz's irritated glare, he spoke calmly. "I'm really sorry about that." Aziz immediately snapped, clearly frustrated. "You're laughing at me too, aren't you?" He let out an annoyed breath before continuing. "Anyway, this is Turan. He's easily one of the most talented magic users I've ever seen. Ridiculously talented. A complete monster." Then he turned toward Misa with a grin. "So, how about a fight?" Misa's expression shifted instantly. "A fight?" Her gaze slowly moved toward Turan, studying him. For a brief moment, silence filled the space. Then her eyes sharpened. A faint blue hue flickered within them, quickly turning intense as her mana surged. In the next instant, golden lightning burst around her body, crackling with destructive force. The atmosphere turned oppressive in an instant. Nisha's presence grew overwhelmingly dangerous. The golden thunder swirling around her intensified, and an invisible pressure spread outward, suffocating everything in its range. It felt like a powerful mental assault, an illusion mixed with raw killing intent. Turan's body stiffened. The weight of her aura pressed down on him like a mountain. His breathing grew heavy as the golden lightning flickered before his eyes. He clenched his teeth, resisting the crushing force, but the pressure only grew stronger. His eyes widened in shock. This level. For a moment, it felt as if his senses were being swallowed whole. Seconds passed like an eternity. Eventually, the pressure eased. Turan stood there, slightly hunched, sweat running down his face. His breathing was uneven, and his body felt drained from resisting her presence alone. He lifted his gaze toward Nisha. She stood there calmly, without a single change in expression. "Sorry to say this," she said in a flat tone, "but you don't look like someone who's at a level to fight me." Her words were sharp, carrying a clear hint of disdain. It wasn't a direct attack, yet it cut deeper than one. Turan's eyes narrowed as he stared back at her, silently absorbing the insult. Turan stood quietly, observing the situation as Aziz suddenly stepped in with an awkward smile. He quickly corrected himself, calling out to his cousin before continuing in a slightly forced tone. Aziz admitted that in terms of pure magical power, Turan might not be able to match her. However, what truly set him apart was his ability to learn magic. As he spoke, he glanced at Turan with clear admiration, calling him a genius unlike anyone he had ever seen. Misa lifted her gaze toward Turan. She remained silent, her expression unreadable, while Aziz continued speaking casually. He even went as far as to say that perhaps even she could not reach that level. That was enough. Misa's expression sharpened instantly. Her patience snapped as she responded coldly. Since he praised Turan so highly, she suggested they test his abilities directly. Turan stepped forward calmly, unaffected by the tension. He proposed a simple challenge. Each of them would use a type of magic the other likely did not know, and whoever could perform it faster would win. His tone remained light, almost playful, as he looked at Misa for her opinion. She studied him for a moment before agreeing. However, she added one condition. Since Turan did not even know his own bloodline magic, it would be unfair for her to use hers. With that, she decided to begin first. Misa took a step forward and assumed a stance. Turan and Aziz watched closely, unsure of what she was about to do. In the next instant, a small sprout emerged from the ground. At first, it looked insignificant, but it quickly thickened and expanded, growing at an unnatural speed. The plant twisted and extended, turning into a powerful vine-like structure. Aziz's eyes widened in shock. Before he could react, the vine shot forward and wrapped tightly around him, lifting him into the air. Startled, he shouted in panic, struggling against the sudden restraint. Misa calmly explained that it was plant creation and manipulation magic. Then she turned her gaze toward Turan and asked if he could replicate it. Meanwhile, Aziz continued shouting, his voice filled with discomfort as he hung helplessly above the ground. He begged to be released, clearly unable to endure it any longer. Misa, however, only told him to stay like that for a moment, finding mild amusement in the situation. Turan, on the other hand, did not react outwardly. Instead, he lowered his gaze toward the ground, his thoughts turning inward. He began analyzing the nature of the magic. Fire creation was simply the manifestation of combustion. Water creation involved drawing moisture from the air. In the same way, this plant magic was not true creation. It was the forced acceleration of growth from existing seeds. Understanding dawned on him. Quietly, he focused his mana and formed a single command in his mind. Grow. At that moment, the ground trembled slightly. A faint blue hue spread beneath the surface as another plant began to emerge. Unlike before, this one carried a different energy, denser, more refined. It expanded rapidly, mirroring the structure Misa had created. Misa's eyes narrowed slightly in surprise. Aziz, still suspended in the air, stared in disbelief. Misa spoke again, her tone now carrying a hint of interest. Since he had commanded it to grow, it seemed he had independently grasped the true nature of the magic. She asked if he had seen it somewhere before. Turan calmly replied that it was his first time. She paused for a brief moment before commenting that Aziz's words had, for once, turned out to be correct. Without another word, she released the vine. Aziz dropped straight to the ground, landing awkwardly as he groaned in pain. Despite his condition, Misa paid him no attention. Her focus remained entirely on Turan. She stepped forward slightly and told him it was now his turn to propose the next challenge. Turan fell silent for a moment. His thoughts moved quickly. Using Zahir bloodline magic here would draw unnecessary attention. That option was not worth the risk. His gaze shifted across the training ground until it settled on a small movement near the garden. A tiny rat creature darted out from the plants and Misa noticed it immediately and questioned whether he intended to use animal control magic. Turan stepped forward and caught the small creature in his hand. He shook his head slightly, stating that it was merely an ingredient. In the next instant, his eyes turned a deep blue as mana surged around him. Aziz froze, watching closely. A blue flame ignited around the creature in Turan's grasp. The fire did not burn like ordinary flames, it consumed silently. Within seconds, the creature's body dissolved completely, turning into pure energy that merged into Turan's hand. The moment the blue flames faded, silence fell over the training ground. Aziz stared in disbelief. What he had just witnessed felt unreal. The small creature in Turan's hand had been reduced to nothing but a fragile, skeletal form before completely dissolving. Turan calmly looked at his hand and spoke as if it were nothing significant. "It's done." Misa's eyes remained fixed on him. There was no hesitation in her expression as she replied, "Very well. Now it's my turn." She raised her hand and pointed toward another small creature nearby. In an instant, she pulled it toward her, gripping it firmly. Without wasting time, she began channeling her mana. A faint flame formed around her hand. As she started the process, her thoughts shifted inward. How did he do that? Her gaze sharpened slightly. This was not ordinary magic. Even with her knowledge, she could not immediately grasp the method Turan had used. For the first time, she acknowledged it. He was not just talented. He was something far beyond that. An extraordinary genius. Before she could proceed further, Aziz's voice suddenly broke the moment. His face twisted with discomfort as he looked at the struggling creature. "Why use that kind of magic? It's disgusting." Turan remained calm and replied without emotion. It was simply the first thing that came to mind. At the same time, a quiet thought passed through his mind. Even a great lineage like the Ebryon family did not seem to fully understand this principle. A faint smile formed within his thoughts, though it never reached his face. Aziz glanced between them, growing uneasy. "It doesn't seem to be working," he he said cautiously. Why don't we just give the win to Turan? Misa's expression darkened instantly. Be quiet. Her voice cut through the air sharply. There was clear frustration behind it, but also determination. Do you think I can't do this? Her grip tightened as the creature struggled in pain. Ignoring everything else, she focused entirely on the process and began explaining, her voice steady despite the intensity of the moment. When using magic, the causality factor is extremely complex. Her eyes remained locked on the creature as mana surged around her. If the phenomenon you intend to create is natural, if you clearly understand its cause, and if the mana you use is sufficient to trigger it. Her voice grew colder as the pressure increased. Then the success rate rises. Among these, understanding the cause is the most important factor. The air around her trembled slightly as her mana output increased even further. And if that understanding is lacking, her flames intensified. You compensate with sheer volume. In the next instant, her eyes burned with a fierce glow. Rat, while you're still alive. A sharp cry echoed from the creature as its body began to distort. The flames wrapped around it, forcing a reaction through overwhelming mana rather than precise control. Aziza's eyes widened. It's working, isn't it? Turan watched closely, his gaze sharpening. The creature's body twisted unnaturally before slowly breaking down under the pressure. Unlike Turan's method, it was unstable and forceful, but it worked. Misa lifted her hand slightly, showing the result. I did it. There was a brief pause. It worked. For a moment, a faint sense of satisfaction appeared on her face. Then, her body suddenly lost strength. The excessive mana consumption caught up to her all at once. Her legs gave out, and she collapsed onto the floor without warning. Aziz immediately rushed forward, catching Misa as she collapsed. Panic filled his voice as he held her tightly. Misa, what happened? Open your eyes. Turan stepped closer, his gaze sharp as he examined her condition. For a moment, he said nothing, carefully observing every detail. What could be the reason? He murmured. His eyes narrowed slightly. Did she use too much mana? He shook his head almost immediately, rejecting that conclusion. A mage doesn't usually faint just from mana depletion. He continued analyzing her. Her body had completely lost strength, unable to even support itself. At most, she should only suffer from exhaustion. Then something caught his attention. Turan's gaze shifted toward her hand. I see. Without wasting time, he lifted Misa into his arms and turned to Aziz. Is there anyone here with healing bloodline magic? Aziz froze for a second before replying. No, there isn't. Turan nodded once. Then bring water and salt to her room. And call the adults as well. He adjusted his grip slightly, noting how light she felt. She's so light, it's hard to believe she's even alive. As he carried her, a thought crossed his mind. The amount of mana she had used was beyond excessive. It wasn't just depletion. She had consumed even the minimum energy required to sustain her body. Some time later, inside the room, Misa's eyes slowly opened. Her vision was blurry at first, but a familiar voice quickly reached her. Misa, are you alright? Can you hear me? It was her mother. Misa blinked a few times, trying to focus. Why am I here? Her mother sighed in relief but remained visibly worried. I heard you fainted while training magic with the guest. Is that true? Misa inhaled sharply. Something felt off. Her mother's expression turned serious. Did that man do something to you? There was a brief silence. Misa shook her head weakly. No, it's not his fault. I made a small mistake. That's all. She paused, her voice lowering. Please, leave me alone for a while. My head. Her mother hesitated but eventually nodded. I prepared some soup for you. I know you often skip meals because of magic, but your health matters too. She gently placed the bowl nearby. Try to eat at least a little. Misa lowered her gaze. Thank you. With that, her mother quietly left the room. Silence returned. Misa slowly looked toward the bowl. Her condition was far from normal. Her pale skin made her resemble a lifeless figure rather than a living person. After a moment, she reached for the spoon. As she took a small sip, her body suddenly froze. A chill ran down her spine. Her hands began to tremble. A voice echoed in her mind. Please, save me, Misa. Her pupils shrank. The image of a young girl appeared, distorted and horrifying. Beside her stood a smaller child, both figures twisted in unnatural ways. It hurts, sister. The spoon slipped from her hand. The bowl shattered against the floor. Misa clutched the blanket tightly, pulling it over herself as she covered her ears. Her entire body trembled uncontrollably, panic overtaking her. Meanwhile, elsewhere, deep within the mansion, in the basement, Turan stood inside a vast chamber. Before him was a temple, radiant and pristine, filled with an almost sacred aura. It looked like a place blessed by a divine presence, the temple of the limping goddess. Beside him stood a man holding a sharp sword. His grip was firm, his posture steady. The walls and doors here are solid, the man said. Not a single crack. It's been like this for hundreds of years. He glanced at Turan. Give up on the idea of breaking through and leave. This man was Harman Birig. Turan calmly met his gaze. I understand. I wasn't planning to break it. Harman studied him for a moment. Is it really that solid? Turan replied simply, yes. In the next instant, Harman suddenly stepped closer, bringing his face near Turan's. Extremely solid. Turan frowned slightly, confused by his behavior. Is he testing me? His gaze shifted briefly toward the sword in Harman's hand. What are you doing? Turan asked. Harman straightened slightly. I'm going to train. Without another word, he began swinging his sword. Each movement was precise, controlled to the smallest detail. There was no wasted motion. Every action flowed perfectly into the next. Turan watched carefully. There was no unnecessary force, no excess preparation. Every step, every strike, was executed with perfect efficiency. So this is the result of a trained body. After observing for a moment, Turan finally spoke. Please, stop. Harman paused mid-motion and looked at him. Turan gave a slight nod. I'm sorry. Did I interrupt you? Harman shook his head and lowered his sword slightly. There was no annoyance in his expression, only curiosity. What did you see in my movements just now? Turan looked at him, slightly caught off guard by the question. For a moment, he hesitated before answering honestly. I thought it was incredible. Harman gave a faint nod, as if confirming something to himself. Without another word, he resumed his training. His blade moved once again, cutting through the air with precise, controlled motions. Most nobles consider martial arts insignificant, he said while continuing his swings. It's easier for them to attack from a distance using magic. His voice remained calm, yet firm. But that's only because their bodies are weak. When the mind cannot properly command the body, they rely on convenient tricks. Turan listened quietly before replying. It's not entirely useless. Some bloodlines are specialized in close combat, but in most cases, focusing on magical power is simply more efficient. As he spoke, a faint memory surfaced in his mind. His past struggles, the harsh life he had endured, the moments where survival depended on more than just magic. He looked at Harman and added, but during certain trials, there are situations you can't avoid. Moments where you're forced to face things directly, even if you don't want to. Harman stopped. For a brief moment, silence filled the space. Then, without hesitation, he extended his sword toward Turan. Hold this. Turan glanced at the weapon, then back at Harman, a hint of confusion in his eyes. You brought me here because I seemed suspicious, didn't you? Are you really fine with giving me a weapon? Harman's expression didn't change. It doesn't matter. This is just a piece of iron. He stepped closer, his gaze steady. What makes it a sword is the one who wields it. His eyes moved over Turan's body. With your current physique, you won't be able to harm me. Turan accepted the sword. He weighed it lightly in his hand, studying its balance. For a moment, he said nothing. What could I even do with this? Harman watched him closely. Then, a faint surge of blue mana began to rise from Turan's body, carrying a subtle pressure. Harman's gaze sharpened. Turan adjusted his grip on the sword. Blue mana slowly wrapped around his body. It was clear he was about to show something.
Turan stood in the temple chamber, his blue mana flaring strongly around the iron sword in his grip. The pressure in the air grew heavier as his energy poured into it. Harman immediately raised his voice, ordering him to stop. He warned that channeling mana like that into a weapon would only ruin its balance. Turan listened and gradually reduced his output, calming the energy back into his body. Seeing this, Harman stepped closer without hesitation. He began correcting Turan's stance himself, adjusting his posture with firm hands. He made Turan shift his weight forward, explaining that his strength had to connect with the ground. He pointed out that his elbow angle was wrong and warned that an exposed posture like that would leave him vulnerable in real combat. According to him, poor form would lead to fatal openings. He instructed Turan to raise his arm properly and not place limits on his movement. Turan accepted every instruction with a simple response. Yes, sir. Harman nodded in approval and ordered him to repeat the motion multiple times. He also told him to control his breathing properly and channel it through his muscles instead of relying on mana. A nearby guard observed quietly, noting that Turan had a strong physical foundation and thinking that such a body would be worth refining to its limit. Harman continued his lecture, dismissing the common belief that mana alone defines strength. He insisted that most mages misunderstood their bodies, treating physical ability as secondary. In reality, he explained, the body itself was the true weapon, and mana was only an addition. A properly trained physique, according to him, could dominate a battlefield even without magical support. Turan exhaled heavily but nodded, accepting the lesson. Suddenly, the heavy temple doors opened. Misa's mother entered quickly, lowering her head in apology. She expressed regret for the disturbance caused and for what had happened involving their guest. Charon remained calm and replied that no apology was necessary, saying he was the one who should be sorry if anything, since he had acted too directly. Misa's mother explained that Misa wanted to personally make amends and asked if Charon could spare some time. Later, Charon met Misa alone in a large, quiet hall. She stood near a tall window, her expression calm but slightly tense. She admitted that things had become complicated and said she had heard he was briefly confined because of her actions. She apologized for the trouble. Charon replied simply that it was unnecessary and that he was just glad she was safe. Misa then brought up the previous day's magic. She asked about the technique that caused organisms to decay, questioning whether it was a hidden bloodline ability. She also pointed out how unnatural the mana cost had been and asked if he had been hiding something. Charon denied it and explained that the technique wasn't special, only a matter of understanding the principle behind it. If someone understood it properly, they could replicate it as well. Misa narrowed her eyes, realizing he had no intention of giving it away freely. She pointed out that without proof, it could easily be labeled as a bloodline skill. Charon responded that he didn't care about winning or losing such arguments. Misa frowned slightly, saying that if things ended like this, it would reflect poorly on her as a princess of Arabian. She then proposed a trade. If he shared the secret behind the technique, she would teach him one of Arabian's hidden arts. Charon agreed without hesitation. He began explaining calmly, breaking the idea down into its core principle: bio-enhancement magic. He asked if she had used invisible microorganisms as a base, and Misa confirmed it, clearly surprised. She realized then why her mana efficiency had been so different. The missing detail had changed everything. For the first time, she admitted defeat. Even though she had succeeded earlier through brute force, she acknowledged that it wasn't a proper victory in terms of technique. Charon noted that their agreement could still be considered complete, but Misa disagreed, saying raw mana output shouldn't count in skill comparison. A little embarrassed, she asked him to tell Aziz that the result was a draw, since she didn't want him becoming arrogant about it. Charon agreed. To settle her part of the deal, Misa then picked up a comb and demonstrated a simple phenomenon, rubbing it to show how it attracted small objects. She began explaining the reasoning behind it confidently, but before she could continue, Charon interrupted quietly. "That's static electricity." Misa froze for a moment, her eyes widening as Charon casually confirmed that he already knew about the principle she had just demonstrated. For a rare second, she looked completely stunned. She quietly admitted that the technique she showed was actually considered one of their more advanced secret arts. After a short pause, she added that she would need time to decide how to properly repay him. Since he knew so much already, she would have to find something beyond his understanding. Then she suggested that, for now, they should train together until she figured it out. Almost immediately, she clarified in a slightly defensive tone that it wasn't because she needed him around, but purely to repay the debt she owed him. Charon responded with a calm smile and agreed. He suggested they meet in the garden every evening starting the next day. Misa accepted the idea without objection. Later, the scene shifted to a large dining hall filled with an overwhelming variety of food. The table was packed with dishes that looked far beyond a normal meal. Aziz looked at it in disbelief. He commented that even on special occasions, he had never seen such a spread, joking that it looked like the Lord of Arabian himself was being hosted. His mother immediately told him to lower his voice. Charon quietly observed the meal and sensed that it was far too extravagant for an ordinary guest. Aziz's mother then turned the conversation back to earlier matters. She asked Charon to confirm whether it was true that Aziz had promised him a powerful magic tool as repayment for saving his life. Charon confirmed it without hesitation. She then asked what kind of item he wanted. Charon thought for a moment before answering. He said he needed something focused on protection. Offense was easy to achieve with magic, but defense was far more difficult. Ideally, it should also protect against sudden attacks. Aziz's mother replied that she had experience crafting similar items, so the request was reasonable. However, she also admitted that nothing suitable was immediately available. At that point, Aziz stepped forward and asked if he could personally handle the creation of the item. His mother immediately rejected the idea, warning him not to bring shame to House Berg. Then Aziz's older brother, Milo, spoke up. He offered to take the request instead, saying he had just completed another assignment and was now free. Their mother asked about his plan. Milo explained that the best approach would be to create something portable that Turan could always carry. He suggested embedding defensive enchantments into jewelry such as rings or necklaces, allowing it to activate a guardian-type protection when needed. Their mother approved the idea and asked how long it would take. Milo answered that it would require about 1 month. She then remarked that while it was unusual for a parent to praise their own child, Milo was already a skilled enchanter and not far behind her. Turan listened carefully and realized the value of what was being offered. A month of work from a top enchanter was far beyond a simple reward. He tried to express that it might be too much, but Aziz's mother immediately cut him off, saying that if it felt excessive, it would mean they were treating his life too lightly. She insisted it was not enough at all. Without further discussion, she ordered Turan to stay as a guest in their estate for the entire month so the item could be completed properly. Turan accepted the arrangement. The next morning, he and Aziz were seen walking through the busy streets of Zavalin. Aziz casually remarked that his mother had clearly grown fond of Turan. He explained that he had spoken about Turan to her the previous night, mentioning his talent, his discipline, and how seriously he treated training. Originally, she had planned to judge him as just another wandering noble with no real backing. But after hearing about him, her opinion had changed. Turan listened quietly and immediately understood the situation. It sounded less like hospitality and more like recruitment. Aziz confirmed his suspicion without hesitation. He said his mother often handled things that way, offering generosity, placing others in her debt, and then subtly guiding them into the family's circle. In some cases, marriage proposals involving young women were even used as leverage to secure loyalty. Turan found the entire method concerning. Aziz, however, waved it off and assured him that things wouldn't go that far. The magic tool was simply a gesture of goodwill, not a trap. His mother, he insisted, still had enough dignity not to force unwanted arrangements. He then asked Turan about his plans for the day. Turan replied that he had promised to train with Lady Maisa in the evening. Aziz checked the time and noted there were still several hours left. With a grin, he suddenly grabbed Turan and insisted they spend the day outside instead of waiting around. He joked that life wasn't meant to be wasted on constant training. Turan admitted honestly that he was actually planning to train anyway, which only made Aziz more determined to pull him away. Aziz took him through the city, starting with a casino filled with games and gambling tables, but Turan showed no interest. They then visited a bar, but he refused again. After that, they walked through busy market streets. At one point, Turan suddenly stopped in front of a wall covered with posters. His expression changed slightly as he stared at a face drawn on one of them. For a brief moment, he seemed shaken, as if it reminded him of someone. Korn. He quietly wondered if it was truly the same person. Later, they attended a live stage performance. Actors reenacted a historical battle from the year 2195, telling the story of Arabian warriors who entered a demon desert and fought alongside a knight named Korn, who defeated the enemy with divine support after a brutal struggle. Both Aziz and Turan applauded at the end. Aziz asked if the show was worth it, and Turan said it was impressive. However, his thoughts lingered on Korn's humility, recalling how he once described himself as just an ordinary knight. Turan decided that if they ever met again, he would ask him about the truth behind that story. The next morning, Turan opened his eyes to find Harman standing over him. Harman asked if he had rested well. Turan confirmed and asked why he was there. Harman explained that after observing him the previous day, he had concluded that Turan's physical foundation was strong. Without wasting time, he declared it was time for real training and ordered him to follow. Turan asked if they were going to train, and Harman simply replied that strength didn't develop through rest but through constant pressure and refinement. After a brief moment, Turan agreed, thinking it would be beneficial. At that moment, Aziz rushed into the room excitedly, calling Turan's name and saying he had heard about an interesting performance. But when he noticed Harman, his attitude immediately changed. The moment Harman suggested he join training as well, Aziz panicked, quickly making excuses and fleeing the room in fear. Turan watched him go, confused by his reaction. That confusion didn't last long. He was soon dragged into an intense training session. Heavy weights pressed against him as Harman pushed him through exhausting physical drills. His body strained under the pressure while Harman constantly ordered him to continue, refusing to let him stop. Turan struggled but endured, while Harman kept emphasizing that weakness of the body only controlled those who gave into it. Finally, after countless repetitions, Harman allowed him to stop. Turan collapsed onto the ground, breathing heavily. Harmon asked if it was tiring. Turan admitted that it was. Harmon explained that for a mage, such training only needed to be done once, since mana naturally helps maintain physical condition afterward. Ordinary warriors, however, required constant training to keep their bodies from weakening again. Turan listened carefully, still recovering. Harmon then smiled slightly and said he should be fully recovered now. Turan tried to respond, but Harmon's expression suddenly darkened as he stated that he already knew Turan's body wasn't the type to lie. Harmon suddenly raised his voice, declaring that Turan had rested long enough. Without giving him any more time to recover, he announced that the next stage of training would begin immediately: combat weapon mastery. Turan could only groan under his breath as the intensity increased again, his exhaustion still heavy in his body. In the days that followed, life inside House Berg settled into a strict routine for him. Every morning, Turan trained under Harmon in a specially prepared chamber where gravity itself felt distorted. The pressure in that space made every movement heavier, and even a small mistake could cause him to lose balance and collapse under his own weight. It was brutal, unforgiving training designed to break hesitation from the body. At night, he returned to the mansion for magic practice with Misa. She taught him advanced techniques step by step, including how to generate electricity through friction and control it through precise mana flow. Golden lightning occasionally sparked between her fingers as she demonstrated control over the energy. Days passed like this without pause. Before Turan realized it, 3 weeks had already gone by. One afternoon during training, Turan attempted to launch a lightning strike at a target. The bolt flew forward, but missed completely. Misa observed silently from behind before commenting that his accuracy was still worse than expected. Turan gave a small smile and said it was probably because he wasn't from Arabayan, unlike her. Misa admitted that even for her, controlling lightning in that precise way wasn't easy. She had never really focused on aiming it like a projectile before. She then asked him if lightning magic didn't automatically strike its target once released. Turan explained that it wasn't that simple. Controlling direction and precision required far more control than just releasing energy. Suddenly, a voice called out, "Lady Misa." A man approached them quickly. He glanced at Turan and asked who he was, but Misa responded coldly, saying it was none of his concern. She then asked why he was there despite her earlier instructions not to be disturbed during her recovery period. The man immediately explained that he had come under direct orders from the patriarch. Misa asked sharply what it was about, warning him that if the reason was unimportant, he would be punished for disturbing her. The knight then delivered the urgent message. Dark elves had begun large-scale attacks in the southern regions. 3 cities had already fallen, and the situation was escalating rapidly. Because of this, the main house was preparing to assemble an expedition force immediately. At that moment, a voice broke the silence. The Dark Elves have begun a massive offensive in the south. Turan immediately turned toward the speaker, his expression sharpening. Beside him, Misha also looked surprised by the sudden report. The messenger continued, his tone urgent. 3 cities have already fallen. They are moving in organized expeditions, and the monsters are in a state of extreme rage. They've appeared in large numbers. Turan lifted his gaze, processing the gravity of the situation. Misha stepped forward slightly and said, "That guard, I understand. Inform everyone. I'll return soon." The guard bowed deeply, showing his respect before leaving. Then Misha spoke calmly, "I think I need to go there." After a brief pause, she turned toward Turan. "Oh, speaking of which, I should collect the payment for that disgusting decomposition magic." She let out a small sigh, then brought her hands together lightly, almost as if in thought. "Turan," she said, her eyes narrowing slightly, "did you know that electricity flows through the human body as well?" Turan looked at her with confusion. "Electricity? What do you mean?" A faint smile appeared on her lips. "Of course you wouldn't know. This is a secret of the Arabin house." She tilted her head slightly. "How about this? I'll consider your debt paid if I teach it to you properly. It will be of great help." Turan hesitated for a moment before replying, "I suppose that works." Misha nodded, satisfied. "When a person senses something," she began, "a thin electrical signal is sent to the brain. If it's sight, the signal travels from the eyes. If it's smell, it moves from the nose. Every sensation follows its own path." Turan closed his eyes and gave a slight nod, focusing on her explanation. Inside, he began to process it. He imagined the flow, thin electrical signals moving through pathways within the body. If those signals could be accelerated, if the current could be strengthened, a surge of energy began to build. The electricity within him grew sharper, faster, like a rising thunderbolt. The moment that power gathered, a faint glow flickered in his eyes, carrying an intensity that felt overwhelming. Silence filled the space. Turan slowly opened his eyes and looked at Misha. She watched him closely. "So, how is it?" At that moment, a small blue butterfly drifted gently toward her face. Turan gave a faint smile. "What is this?" Suddenly, a powerful jolt ran through his body. The surge struck him sharply, and he grabbed his head in pain. "That's too intense." Misha smiled, clearly pleased. "Looks like you pulled it off." Misha continued, "That happened because you released your mana too recklessly. It's natural that you're having trouble adjusting right now, especially with that headache. But once you get used to it, you'll be able to maintain it for quite a while." Turan lifted his head and looked at her. "No matter how I think about it, this feels far too valuable compared to what I gave you." Before he could say anything more, Misha suddenly leapt lightly into the air. "This is simply an investment," she said with a confident smile. "You seem to have some talent. If you learn an even more incredible spell in the future, I'll collect everything back, including what you owe me." She hovered briefly before moving away through the air. Turan watched her, clearly surprised. The scene shifted. A bird soared across the sky, carrying a message. Below, figures dressed in black hoods gathered in a wide area. This was the central district of Morgan, a city aligned against the Dark Elves. One of the pupils raised his hand and shouted, "Glory to Evrian." The voices of others rose together, echoing with enthusiasm. A man standing nearby spoke with a faint smile, "It's just a departure ceremony to hunt the Dark Elves, yet it already feels like victory. Look at their spirit." Turan stood among the crowd, observing quietly. Beside him was Aziz, who glanced around with curiosity. "It's quite something," Aziz said, clearly impressed. At that moment, Misha arrived along with members of her house. Aziz noticed her immediately and called out, "Misha." Before he could continue, an elder firmly grabbed his arm. "Aziz, maintain your composure," the elder said sternly. "You are a noble." Aziz frowned. "But, father, follow my words." Aziz fell silent, though reluctance remained on his face. Suddenly, a loud voice rang out. "The head of the house is entering." The atmosphere shifted instantly. Turan's gaze sharpened as he looked toward the approaching figure. Heavy footsteps echoed, commanding attention. Inside, Turan thought, "That person is the current head of the Evrian house." The man appeared before them, his presence overwhelming. His body looked frail, his complexion pale, yet the pressure he emitted was immense. This was Bedel Evrian. Turan narrowed his eyes. "The head of the house doesn't look well. He seems unusually pale. Could his health be failing?" Aziz spoke quietly. "I've heard rumors that he was severely injured in a battle against the head of the Zir house long ago. But that was years back. Perhaps it's simply due to age." At that moment, Bedel Evrian slowly raised his hand. Everyone watched with anticipation. Then, a golden thunderbolt split the sky. The sheer force of it filled the entire area with an overwhelming magical presence. The pupils looked up in awe. "Long live Evrian." Their voices rose again. "O Lord of Thunder, protect your descendants." Turan stared at the scene, deeply shaken by the power before him. "This is the strength of a true powerhouse," he thought. Even in such a weakened state, he can transform the entire area into the pinnacle of magical control. His eyes hardened with determination. "One day, I will reach that level." Some time later, inside the residence, a man approached Turan and handed him a bracelet. "Here," he said, "wearing this will increase your physical stamina. If you channel mana into it, that effect will rise even further." He continued, "At its limit, it can elevate you to a level comparable to a noble of the Guardian bloodline. However, it consumes a significant amount of mana, so it's best not to maintain it for too long." Turan accepted the bracelet and examined it carefully. "This is truly an incredible item," he said quietly. "Something like this wouldn't be common, even among the great houses." He looked at it with clear admiration. "It's exceptionally well made." At that moment, Aziz's mother approached Turan. "Do you have any interest in formally joining our house?" she asked gently. Turan responded calmly, "I'm truly grateful for the offer, but I don't think that would be possible." She gave a small nod. "I see. I already heard everything from Aziz. He said you have many things to accomplish, so it would be difficult for you to settle in one place." Her voice softened slightly. "Just think of this as an old woman's lingering attachment." Turan bowed respectfully. "I will never forget the hospitality I received from you, madam. Aziz and the Barak family will always be my friends." She smiled faintly. "That is more than enough." After stepping outside, Turan noticed Aziz standing with his master. The master approached and handed him a small dagger. "This is a magical device," he explained. "It doesn't have any special abilities, but it's durable, and the blade is quite sharp. Turan accepted it with both hands. Thank you. The man looked pleased, a proud smile appearing on his face before he turned and left. Then Aziz stepped forward and handed Turan a neatly folded set of clothes. Turan looked at it in confusion. What is this? Aziz scratched his head lightly. Didn't you say you were jealous of my clothes? These don't get dirty easily, and they repair themselves if slightly damaged. It's a shirt and pants, for you. Turan felt a quiet warmth at the gesture. Aziz smiled. You're a good friend, Turan, not just because you saved my life, but because spending time with you made me think differently about many things. He paused before asking, so, where are you planning to go now? East, for now, Turan replied. Aziz nodded. Carmen's is in that direction. I've been there before. If you can, avoid traveling by ship. The waves are terrible. Even wine glasses won't stay still. Turan gave a faint smile, though his thoughts ran deeper. To reach the land of Zihar, the ethereal desert, I would have to cross those waves. But there's no need to say that now. Aziz chuckled. Well, with that stubborn attitude of yours, you'll manage anywhere. Then he added firmly, come back safely. And don't forget to pay me back for those clothes, alright? Turan nodded with a small smile. I will. Sometime later, in the eastern region, Turan walked alone once again. Back to being alone, he muttered quietly. Then he began to run. His speed increased rapidly, his mana flowing smoothly through his body. The people nearby stared in shock as he passed them in a blur. At that moment, someone in the distance noticed him, their gaze sharpening at the overwhelming presence of his mana. Turan didn't stop. He continued forward and eventually reached his destination. Standing near a mountainous area, he slowed down and looked ahead. The smell of a campfire, he murmured. Then his expression changed. No, this is different. A foul stench filled the air. The smell of burning flesh. His eyes shifted forward, and what he saw made him freeze. Bodies hung from wooden structures, lifeless and charred. They had been brutally killed. Turan's gaze hardened. Could this have been the work of bandits? The dark elves shouldn't have reached this far. He exhaled slowly, taking in the ruined surroundings. Everything was in chaos. There was no sign of life. After a moment, Turan moved toward a nearby house and stopped in front of the door. It's here. He reached out to open it, but the door suddenly gave way with force. Inside, a young girl screamed in fear. Turan quickly raised his hand slightly, keeping his voice calm. Wait, calm down. I'm not your enemy. I came to help. The girl trembled as she looked at him. Really? She asked weakly. Turan nodded. Yes. Can you tell me what happened here? Her voice shook as she spoke. He killed everyone. Turan's eyes narrowed slightly. A mage. Before she could say anything more, her body collapsed. Turan quickly caught her. Fortunately, it's nothing serious, he muttered. She's just exhausted, probably from being trapped in the basement for so long. He adjusted his hold on her. First, I need to take her somewhere safe. But suddenly, found you. A sharp voice cut through the air. Turan's gaze snapped toward the sound. A girl stood at a distance, aiming an arrow directly at him. Get on your knees, she shouted. You murderous bastard. Turan stared at her, surprised by the accusation. The moment the girl forced Turan onto his knees, the tension in the air tightened sharply. Her grip around her bowstring stiffened as she aimed straight at him, her voice trembling with anger as she accused him of being a murderer. Turan's eyes narrowed in surprise, his gaze locking onto hers. Before he could respond, she continued, her voice filled with outrage, insisting that the massacre should have been enough and accusing him of attempting to kidnap a child. It was clear she had already judged him. In her mind, Turan was the very mage responsible for destroying the tribe. A man stepped forward from behind her, charging golden energy into his weapon. His voice rang out with a warning, threatening to release the attack the moment Turan made a move. Despite the hostility surrounding him, Turan remained calm. He tried to explain that everything was a misunderstanding. However, his words barely left his mouth before another man launched a fire-based attack straight at him. A massive explosion erupted. The girl immediately shouted at the blonde man, Gil, scolding him for his recklessness and reminding him that a child had been right there. Gil panicked, his voice shaking as he tried to justify himself, admitting it had been an accident caused by his nerves. But the girl's anger quickly faded into shock. Her eyes fell on Turan. He stood there unharmed, shielding the little girl completely. Not even a single burn mark could be seen on him. Using only his magic, he had protected her without letting the attack touch her at all. The surrounding group froze. One of them muttered in disbelief at the absence of any injury, while another questioned how such a defense was even possible. The young girl in Turan's arms stared at him in awe, wondering how he had blocked magic with his own body. The archer girl silently observed him, her thoughts racing as she tried to understand the nature of his defensive ability, questioning whether it was some kind of bloodline power. Turan finally spoke again, his tone steady. He made it clear that he was not the one responsible for the attack on the village. He repeated that it was a misunderstanding and warned that if they continued to attack him, he would be forced to defend himself. The girl hesitated. Her eyes shifted toward the child in Turan's arms. The situation no longer matched her earlier assumptions. Slowly, her posture relaxed, and the hostility faded from her expression. She admitted that his actions did not align with someone who would cause such destruction and then remain behind just to save a child. After a brief pause, she introduced herself as Bison and asked for his name. Turan answered simply. Even then, doubt lingered in her voice as she questioned how she could trust him despite the circumstances. Turan suggested that they wait for the child to wake up, as she might have seen the real culprit. At that, Bison's expression shifted with realization. She mentioned the name tied to the attacks. Turan asked about it, unfamiliar with the name. Bison stared at him in disbelief before explaining. The culprit was a mad mage responsible for repeated attacks over the past few months, targeting isolated villages and tribes. The victims were burned alive, leaving no survivors behind. Because of that, even the mage's identity remained unknown. All they knew was the name people had given him, an existence feared like a monster. The era of mist. Some time later, the child finally regained consciousness. In a weak voice, she described what she had seen, a man in a red cloak with a beard, his appearance rough and intimidating, like a lumberjack. Bison and her team listened carefully, taking in every detail. Once the explanation ended, her gaze slowly returned to Turan. Then, without hesitation, she bowed her head. She apologized sincerely, admitting that her impatience had led her to wrongly accuse him and even point a weapon at him. Gil also stepped forward, offering his own apology. Turan looked at them quietly. As silence settled, his thoughts drifted. Even among nobles, there were those whose sense of duty clouded their judgment. Yet at the same time, he could see that Bison possessed honesty. The moment she realized her mistake, she admitted it without hesitation, disregarding her own status. Returning to the present, Turan spoke calmly, acknowledging that her concern for the child had been the most important thing. Bison then asked if he had come to capture the culprit. Turan denied it outright, stating he had no connection to the matter. She nodded, explaining that her group had been tracking the recent incident due to signs of fresh fire at the site. They had believed they finally caught the culprit, only to realize their mistake. Still, with the new description, she was confident they would find him soon. She also mentioned that their group included a natural tracker. That caught Turan's attention. He asked if she belonged to the Zihar family and questioned why someone like her would be in a place like this. Bison quickly raised her hands in denial. She introduced herself properly as Bison Carmine of the Carmine family, stating that she came from Abacha. She then gestured toward her companions, explaining that they were her allies. Finally, she mentioned Aisha, describing her as someone with mixed blood from an ancient lineage. Bison continued her explanation, adding that Aisha carried traces of the ancient Yahir noble bloodline. However, it manifested only faintly. While Aisha possessed exceptional ability in tracking magic, she lacked any real talent for concealment. Within her family, such a trait was referred to as a primitive bloodline. Then Bison's tone shifted slightly as she addressed Turan more seriously. She made a request, asking if he would assist them in hunting down the culprit. In return, she offered him the entire reward for capturing the mage, even including her share of mana. All she wanted was the merit tied to the achievement. Turan did not answer immediately. Instead, he questioned the strength of their target. Bison explained that the culprit was undoubtedly at the level of a noble mage. Some of the villages he had attacked had been under the protection of multiple knights, yet all of them were slaughtered. Hearing that, Turan fell into brief thought. An opponent capable of killing several knights, it was exactly the kind of challenge he needed. The weak demonic beasts he had encountered so far had done little to improve his strength. With that conclusion, he accepted her offer without hesitation. Bison responded with a faint smile and suggested that their first priority should be ensuring the child's safety. Some time later, Turan arrived at a settlement. He handed a pouch of money to a man, instructing him to use it to raise the child until she was grown. The man nodded quickly, assuring him that he would take responsibility. Turan's gaze hardened as he warned that he would return in a few years to check on the child. The man trembled under that stare, clearly understanding the weight behind those words. After leaving the child behind, Turan regrouped with Bison's team. Aisha stepped forward and activated her tracking ability. A faint blue glow formed in her eyes as she scanned the surroundings, carefully observing every detail. She noted that they needed to widen their search and began moving through the forest. Her focus remained sharp as she examined the terrain. Turan asked how exactly she was tracking the target. Aisha explained calmly that she first searched for human footprints. Once they reached a main path, she would follow the scent of ash. If the culprit had not changed clothes, traces of ash would still linger on him. Turan acknowledged her method silently. It was precise and efficient. The only reason she had failed earlier was due to the lack of information, not skill. Then suddenly, Aisha stopped. Her eyes sharpened as she spoke. She had found something. Turan's gaze followed her line of sight, while Bison immediately signaled everyone to slow down. Moments later, they arrived near a stone cave hidden within the forest. Bison instructed Turan to move forward with her while ordering the others to stay back. Together, they stepped into the cave, followed closely by the rest of the group. Inside, the darkness was thick, but Bison ignited a faint blue mana light, illuminating the path ahead like a torch. She turned to Aisha and asked if anyone was inside. Aisha confirmed that there was one person. They advanced deeper. Soon, the faint glow revealed a figure standing near a burning pile of wood. The man stood calmly at the center, his presence unsettling. The entire group froze. The man's appearance carried an eerie aura as he looked at them and spoke casually, asking what had brought them to such an isolated place. Turan stepped forward slightly, his eyes fixed on the man. He questioned whether this was the individual responsible for wiping out the village and nearby tribes. Aisha quietly confirmed that she could sense a dangerous presence from him. There was no doubt this was their target. Without wasting another second, Bison raised her bow. Mana gathered around her as she drew the string back, her voice firm as she demanded to know if he was the one responsible for the killings and kidnappings. The man responded vaguely, pretending ignorance. Then, in the next instant, a violent explosion erupted. Flames burst outward, engulfing the area. Bison and her teammates were thrown back by the force, crashing into the ground as pain shot through their bodies. But Turan reacted instantly. A protective barrier formed around him, and he extended it to shield Bison as well, blocking the full impact of the attack. The man's expression shifted in surprise. He had not expected anyone to withstand that blast so easily. Taking advantage of the moment, Bison released her arrow. It flew straight toward the target, piercing into the man's thigh. He staggered and dropped to the ground, struggling to maintain his balance. However, he did not remain down for long. With a twisted expression, he activated another spell. The ground trembled as stone magic surged forward. From the earth, two massive stone hands emerged, rising violently as they reached toward Turan and Bison, intent on crushing them where they stood. As the massive stone hands rose toward him, Turan looked up, his expression sharpening. Earth manipulation, the realization came instantly. He had assumed the man possessed a flame-related bloodline, yet this proved otherwise. Without hesitation, Turan leaped away, avoiding the crushing force. His eyes locked onto the man the moment he landed. The culprit raised his hand again, preparing another attack. Turan did not give him the chance. Mana surged through his body as he released a sharp strike, slicing through the man's arm. The limb was severed cleanly, and a scream of agony echoed through the cave. Before the man could recover, Turan followed up immediately. Lightning burst forth. His thunder magic struck directly into the man's chest, sending violent currents through his body. The man convulsed as blue energy spread across him, his vision flickering under the overwhelming force. The attack did not stop there. Turan pressed forward, channeling more power until the man's resistance collapsed entirely. Within moments, the culprit fell to the ground, completely subdued by the destructive lightning. From behind, Bison called out, asking if it was over. Turan answered calmly that he would handle the situation and told her to check on the others. Stepping closer, he extended his hand. Threads of mana formed into bindings, wrapping tightly around the man's body. The restraints locked his movements and sealed his senses. It was over. After some time, the man regained consciousness. The first thing he saw was Turan standing before him. Turan pointed directly at his neck, his voice cold and absolute as he warned him not to move. Any attempt to release mana would result in immediate death. The man stared at him and demanded to know who he was and how they had found this place. Bison stepped forward and answered briefly that they had their own methods. Then she asked directly if he was the one responsible for the attacks. The man remained silent. His expression twisted with anger, refusing to respond. Turan's gaze darkened. Without hesitation, he drove pain into the man's already injured leg, forcing a reaction. The man trembled as the pain intensified. Turan demanded an answer, questioning why a noble mage would burn innocent villagers. His tone carried no sympathy, only cold judgment. The man finally spoke. He claimed that it was all the will of a god. By burning the flesh and souls of sinners, he believed he could reach that god. Bison's expression froze in disbelief. The man continued, explaining that he had been taught a secret, one that allowed him to obtain other bloodlines. According to him, by sacrificing more people, he would eventually gain the power of a flame bloodline. Bison's face turned cold. She rejected the idea immediately, calling it nothing but madness. An innate bloodline was not something that could be gained through such horrific means, and committing massacres for such a reason was beyond reason. Turan remained silent, but his expression shifted. For a brief moment, a memory surfaced in his mind, himself growing stronger through the killing of demonic beasts. The thought lingered, unsettling in its similarity. The man laughed weakly, insisting that such methods were not unheard of among certain mages, describing it as a kind of ritual. Then he continued, muttering that he only needed a few more sacrifices to finally obtain the power he desired. Turan's gaze hardened. This was no longer just the delusion of a madman. He grabbed the man firmly, his grip tightening without mercy. His expression darkened as a chilling realization formed within him. In a low voice, he spoke. Perhaps he had just uncovered something far deeper, a hidden truth of this world. At the sudden sharp movement, the blade cut cleanly through the man's neck in a single, smooth strike. His body collapsed to the ground, and blood spread across the floor. Everyone froze. No one could speak as they stared at the one responsible. Even Turan remained silent. One of Bisen's teammates felt a wave of nausea and anxiety. The sight of such a ruthless killing left him shaken. Bisen immediately demanded to know what was wrong, but the man struggled to respond. With a pale face, he forced himself to speak, saying it was not just killing, it was the execution of someone completely defenseless. He added that it felt more like a slaughter, something disturbing enough to send chills down his spine. Bisen, however, showed no sympathy. She dismissed his words, reminding him how close they had come to dying earlier. To her, feeling pity for a man who had wiped out an entire village, including children, without hesitation was nothing but nonsense. Then she glanced at the corpse and coldly stated that considering how many lives he had taken, even keeping him alive just to make him suffer would not have been enough. Turan quietly stepped forward, picked up a book lying nearby, and let out a small sigh as he opened it. After reading for a moment, he explained that this was enough proof. The man they had killed was indeed the culprit. However, something in the book caught his attention. He pointed at a specific section and noted that he had never seen such a combination of formulas before. His gaze shifted to a strange diagram, and he wondered if this method had also been derived from what people called the voice of a god. Before he could think further, a voice came from behind. "Sir Turan, let's take it with us." Without hesitation, Turan and the others used their magic to cover the corpse in a robe-like layer of energy, preparing it for transport. Some time later, Turan and Bisen arrived at a noble family estate. A young butler, accompanied by soldiers, greeted them with a polite smile. Presenting a box, he congratulated Bisen on capturing the culprit, declaring that her team had brought honor and recognition to the Carmine family. Bisen responded modestly, saying he was praising her too much, though she understood what he meant. Turan, meanwhile, quietly observed his surroundings. After a brief pause, Bisen asked him what he planned to do next, mentioning that her team would continue traveling to hunt demonic beasts. She watched him with curiosity as he handed a pouch of money back. Turan accepted it calmly and replied that he was heading straight to Abicha. Bisen was clearly surprised. She leaned closer and lowered her voice, mentioning that Abicha was considered an abandoned place. Referring to what had been said the previous day, she questioned whether he truly intended to go there. Turan's expression hardened slightly. He stated that he had no intention of spreading such information. Whether it was true or not, it could cause massive chaos. With that, Bisen said she would see him again another time. Her teammates expressed their gratitude, and one of them waved goodbye. Turan simply smiled faintly and bid them farewell. As he left, a thought crossed his mind: there was no need to share his suspicions yet. Without solid proof, it was better to ignore the matter for now. Some time later, he arrived in a vast desert. As he walked forward, he noticed the air gradually becoming more humid. With a slight flick of his finger, a small flame appeared in his hand. Observing it, he realized that his firepower had weakened while his mana consumption had increased. Using fire magic in this environment would be difficult. On the other hand, he sensed that another element had become easier to control: fire and water. As he continued forward, the desert opened up into a vast, sea-like expanse. Blue sunlight reflected across the water, creating a breathtaking view. Turan stopped at a high point and looked ahead. "This is Abicha." Before him stood the magnificent city of Abicha, surrounded by the sea, both beautiful and mysterious. Some time later, Turan arrived at a restaurant near the docks. The place was filled with sailors preparing for their next journey, their voices blending with the clatter of mugs and plates. One man raised his drink and mentioned that they would be setting sail the next day. Another man responded with frustration, saying their route passed through the desert sea, where mermaids constantly attacked ships with harpoons. He recalled how, on a previous trip, their hull had been nearly torn apart. An older, middle-aged man added that pirates were just as much of a problem. Someone else agreed, saying it had become increasingly dangerous to travel by ship. The captain, who had been listening quietly, let out a heavy sigh. He remarked that at this rate, they would end up paying for funerals instead of wages. Even their skills as sailors were becoming useless in such conditions. At that moment, Turan stepped forward. He politely asked the captain if they were heading toward the Enel desert. The captain looked at him with suspicion before answering that they were leaving the next day, but their ship was practically cursed. He added that they had no room for new crew members and questioned why Turan wanted to travel with them. Then the captain said coldly, taking on an extra person would only increase their burden, and he had no intention of agreeing to it. Without hesitation, Turan reached out and placed his hand over the man's mug. The man frowned and asked what he was doing. In the next moment, the liquid inside the mug froze solid. A thin layer of ice spread across it, formed purely by Turan's magic. The man's expression changed instantly, shock replacing his earlier defiance. He asked if Turan was a mage. The others stood up in surprise. One of them assumed he must belong to a noble family, while another wondered why someone of such status would be in a place like this. Turan calmly told them to speak normally. He made it clear that he was not here as a noble, but to ask for work. The captain studied him carefully before asking what exactly he wanted. Turan replied that he needed to reach the Enel desert not as a passenger, but as hired help. He explained that if they were attacked by mermaids or pirates, he would assist in defending the ship. They could consider it payment for his passage. The captain fell silent for a moment, thinking it over. Then he admitted that Turan must have overheard their conversation. Their ship was in poor condition, and they could not offer proper wages or even decent living space, especially not for someone of his ability. Turan responded without hesitation that none of that mattered. His only goal was to reach the Enel desert. The captain looked at him in surprise. After a brief pause, he smiled and agreed. The matter was settled. Turan could join them immediately. Soon after, Turan boarded the ship. The scenery changed again. A village was engulfed in flames, consumed by destruction and hatred. Every building was burning, collapsing under the intensity of the fire. Nothing remained untouched. Amid the chaos, a young boy stood his ground. He had been striving to achieve something greater, but now he faced a goblin-like monster. The creature's sharp, golden eyes glowed with fury, and its entire presence radiated uncontrollable rage. The boy tightened his grip on his sword and launched repeated attacks. However, the monster endured them and charged forward again with overwhelming force. The boy struggled, gradually being pushed into a corner. Still, he refused to give up. Gathering his strength, he forced the creature back momentarily. Yet it was clear that the opponent was not in a stable state of mind. It fought like a beast driven purely by rage. Clenching his teeth, the boy muttered in frustration that at this rate, he would not learn anything new about himself or improve any further. Moments later, the sky darkened. A violent surge of lightning split through the clouds, filling the air with destructive energy. The boy froze for an instant, surprised by the sudden appearance of thunder within the chaos. Then he saw him. A man stood firmly, gripping his sword without hesitation or fear. His stance was unwavering, as if he had complete control over the situation. The boy turned his head. A warrior-like woman descended from above. She floated briefly in the air before landing gracefully on the ground. Relief crossed the boy's face as he thanked her. She gave a simple command, telling him to return to his unit. Exhausted, the boy stepped back, but his mind remained occupied. He could not stop thinking about that woman, Misha, and the overwhelming power she had displayed. At that moment, an orange-haired man approached, clearly irritated. He asked whether the boy was injured. His voice carried authority. He was the commander of the Arabian subjugation force. At that moment, Misha addressed the orange-haired man as her uncle. She tried to reassure him, saying she would handle things on her own. However, her uncle warned her not to push herself too hard, reminding her that she was worth far more than a few sleepless nights. He then shifted his focus and calmly asked about the situation. According to the reports, their progress was not bad. At this rate, they would soon reclaim the region. However, one major problem remained: they had yet to locate the tunnel. Misha's expression turned cold. She stated that once the tunnel was found, she would handle it personally. Without waiting for a response, she leapt high into the sky and disappeared from sight. Her uncle stood still for a moment, then looked out toward the sea with visible annoyance. He muttered that she was becoming increasingly difficult to deal with, blaming his brother for spoiling her too much. He added that if she continued like this, she might end up the same way as her mother and brother. Meanwhile, Misha continued flying across the sky. The scene shifted again. Several ships moved steadily across the sea. Standing on the deck of one of them, Turan gazed quietly at the surrounding waters. His thoughts grew heavy as he considered his next steps. Even if he reached the Zahir territory, he had no clear lead to follow. Without knowing his father's exact location, charging blindly into the Zahir family would be extremely dangerous. He let out a quiet breath and opened his family book. His eyes fell on a picture inside. That was all he had. A faint trace of his mother, and of his father. Turan continued to think quietly, wondering how long it would take to uncover anything with so little information. Just then, someone called out to him. It was the same man who had been joking earlier. He placed a hand on Turan's shoulder and mockingly said that if he kept staring like that, he might dry up the entire sea. Then he asked what was on his mind. Turan replied calmly that he had simply been thinking about the vastness of the ocean. The man laughed and agreed. He said the sea was enormous, and that some people felt sick just by looking at it. Then he asked how Turan was handling the seasickness. Turan answered that he was fine. The man leaned closer, keeping his hand on Turan's shoulder, and mentioned that he had heard Turan had been learning everything from the ship's crew, from tying knots to handling the sails. He seemed pleased and said he had been looking forward to teaching him properly. Turan smiled faintly and said he had only wanted to learn something new. It had turned out to be more enjoyable than he expected. Suddenly, a voice rang out, announcing that it was time to eat. The man clapped his hands enthusiastically and called everyone to the mess hall. Some time later, Turan sat quietly and he is eating his meal. In front of him, a middle-aged man commented that food on land was better, but they were fortunate not to forget the importance of certain supplies, especially sauerkraut. Without them, they might have already died from disease during the journey. Turan showed a hint of curiosity and asked what kind of disease he meant. The man explained that it was a condition where the gums would bleed continuously until death. However, sour foods could prevent it, which was why they carried such provisions, even if the taste was unpleasant. Turan listened carefully. Before the conversation could continue, a loud shout came from above. A lookout reported a ship approaching from the 2 o'clock direction, a mid-sized vessel heading straight toward them. From its appearance, it seemed to be a pirate ship. A man with a telescope quickly examined the approaching vessel and confirmed that it carried no flag or insignia of any noble family or knights. An older crew member frowned and said it certainly looked like pirates. He muttered that the calm weather had been too good to be true. Immediately, he raised his voice and ordered everyone to prepare for combat. The crew rushed into action, grabbing their weapons. Someone asked the captain what the plan was, whether they should try to escape. The captain observed the enemy ship through a telescope. Another man pointed out that the pirate vessel was slightly faster. If they were chased for long, they would eventually be caught. However, if the wind held steady, they might be able to reach a nearby island. The man beside Turan glanced at him and asked if he could handle the situation. Turan replied calmly that as long as there were no knights or nobles among the enemy, it would not be a problem. The captain made his decision. He ordered the ship to turn and face the enemy. The crew responded with loud cheers, raising their weapons and shouting battle cries. Soon, the pirate ship drew close. One of the pirates shouted across the distance, ordering them to stop. He claimed that if they complied, their lives would be spared. Turan remained calm and asked quietly whether they would truly spare them if they surrendered. The old man beside him scoffed and replied that having their limbs cut off and being thrown overboard hardly counted as mercy. Turan nodded slightly, then said he had an idea. In the next moment, he stepped forward and leapt high into the air. He landed smoothly onto the pirate ship. The pirates were stunned, staring at him in shock. One of them shouted in disbelief, unable to understand what had just happened. Without hesitation, Turan prepared to act. The sea around them began to shift. The water rose and sharpened, forming blade-like shapes that glimmered under the light. The crew watching from afar shouted in astonishment, unable to comprehend what they were witnessing. At that moment, fear spread among the pirates. The sharpened streams of water descended like a storm of blades. Each strike pierced through their bodies without mercy, cutting them down in an instant. Panic took over the deck as the pirates realized they had no way to defend against such an attack. Amid the chaos, Turan stood calmly, his expression cold as he maintained control over his mat. He spoke in a low, emotionless voice. If they were like this, there was no reason to spare them. His gaze remained steady, showing no hesitation as he prepared to finish the battle.